Good evening all and welcome. At a viewer's request, tonight I have for you a compilation of scary trucker and on-the-road stories, of course told in the pouring rain. So have your windscreen wipers ready, because it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. This is my father's story, and happened when he was an 18-year-old gas station attendant in the late 70s. And without the help of a certain long-haul trucker, I probably wouldn't be here. The gas station was 24 hours, and my dad was the only one working the night shift from 11 to 7. When a guy comes in who just gives him the creeps. He seemed sketchy, and was wearing a tight jacket and pants, and you could tell he had something in his pants under the jacket. Mind you, this was during the summer, and it was warm, so why was he wearing a jacket to begin with? It was later confirmed he was on drugs. A lot of the truck drivers use this station, as it's the only 24-hour gas station in a long stretch of the highway. They also had a big lot where truckers could park and sleep or just take a break. Well, on this night, it was just my dad and the sketchy dude, and one trucker in there who he kind of knew, as he came in frequently enough to be conversational. And he asked him slyly if he wouldn't mind if the trucker stayed to hang out until the sketchy dude left. Well, after looking at the stocked shelves for several minutes while sneaking peeks at my dad, the guy eventually looked fed up and got into his blue car and sped off. The cool truck driver guy hung out with my dad a little longer until another couple of guys came in to use the booth they had to eat a sandwich. I should also point out that it was pretty middle of nowhere in rural southeast United States and the 1970s. CBs and landline it was, and my dad had only a landline in the store, and not a protective weapon at all. So the hours pass, and my dad had shaken off the paranoia when all of a sudden this guy in a car comes hauling ass into the lot, jumps out, and sprints into the store hollering he needs a phone. He didn't have a CB, nor did he see a phone at the other station. He also wasn't familiar with the area, and my dad's station was the first place he found. He calls 911 to report that he had walked in on a gas station 40 miles back, which happened to be the next closest gas station, to find the attendant shot and dead. No one else was around, and the only other piece of information is that a blue car was speeding out of the lot when the trucker pulled in. Apparently they eventually apprehended the guy in the blue car, and my dad confirmed that it was the sketchy dude from earlier in the night, and they charged him with murder and armed robbery. The long-haul trucker who waited around with my dad that night, thanks, and I hope you're keeping it real. Also worth adding that apparently the sketchy guy in the blue car was already a bad apple who was either being looked for or on probation. He was in the system, and my dad and myself are lucky to be alive. I once dated a girl who was a trucker. She mostly did short haul, but occasionally had to run loads to a warehouse out of state, and when she did I usually tagged along. There was this one time that we were on the road, and we pulled into this nasty abandoned-looking truck stop right on the New Mexico-Texas border for fuel. All fueled up, we headed inside to see if we could get something to eat. The inside of this place looked like something out of Fallout, mostly empty shelves with random dust-covered canned goods and old boxes of this and that, lights flickering and making that pinging sound, with not a soul to be found. We grabbed a few bags of chips and waited near the register, and after making some noise and waiting for like 5 minutes, we put the stuff back and went outside. Surrounding her truck were about 10 guys who all looked pretty scary. Remembering at that precise moment I had left the gun in the truck, my stomach understandably dropped. A biker then rolled up and talked to the 2 guys near the back of the truck for a minute, then does the slitting throat motion. My girl is shaking and close to crying, and I'm pretty sure I've already crapped my pants. The biker throws his hands up, tells everyone to move and walks over to us. He then very politely tells us that someone had stolen a trailer of his up north, and he was looking for it. This one wasn't it, and he apologized for the drama, reached into his pocket and grabs something and sticks it in my hand, and tells me he was very sorry for the trouble. As he's walking away, I look into my hand. It's a bag of weed. We got the hell out of there pretty fast. Good weed though, and we joked about trying to find him on the way back to get a bit more. These are some of my grandpa's stories while he was a state trooper, and recounted a story where a group of college students were embarking on their journey for spring break, when, during their course of the drive, they suffered a collision with a semi-truck. Amidst the chaos, 3 of them emerged from the wreck seemingly unscathed. My grandfather arrived and began surveying the scene. The car's roof had been peeled back like a tin can, and the brunt of the devastation was concentrated on the passenger side. The 3 college students were eerily quiet, not answering questions very helpfully, and clearly in a state of shock. So my grandfather approached the vehicle to inspect it further, his concern unwavering as he sought to offer assistance to the unseen 4th passenger who hadn't actually left the vehicle yet. From his vantage point behind and to the left, the individual appeared unscathed, but as he rounded to the front, he discovered to his horror that the right side of the passenger's head had been obliterated by the force of the collision. In a separate story, I found myself inadvertently delving into the dark recesses of my grandfather's past while looking through old police files and photographs stored away in his filing cabinets. Among the relics of his law enforcement career lay a haunting image. My curiosity piqued, and so I asked my grandfather about the macabre photo, prompting him to share a tragic story. There was this very tired truck driver who had been doing too many hours, and he succumbed to exhaustion. In so, he somehow passed out, managed to open his door while doing so, and not wearing a seatbelt. I'm sure you can add together what happened. Consequently, he plummeted to the ice-cold asphalt, where he was promptly flattened by his truck wheels, leaving his corpse crushed and lifeless like crisps under bison. The task of recovering his shattered shell from the icy embrace of the winter ground fell upon my grandfather and his colleagues, a grim duty requiring them to scrape off the remnants of a life come short from the frigid pavement. As you can imagine, it was not his favorite job. This happened when I was 18. I was a male dressed in black pants, a white undershirt, and a black long-sleeve shirt with black shoes. My passenger was a 20-year-old female, dressed in a light-colored shirt with jeans. It was late in the 20th century and life was good. I was driving an original paint job, an interior 1970s Camaro SS, tipped with the scales for driving fun. I was a happy guy. Anne had a request for me to bring my passenger to Las Vegas to meet her family. She was a friend of a friend, so I didn't worry about her, and my car was seeming in good shape for the trip. It was July and very hot in Southern California. The day we took off for Las Vegas, cueing the stereo, we headed out. All was going well in our drive. As the temperature soared from very hot to hot, we made our way along Interstate 15 North. If you've ever driven this road, you know it's extreme, but at that time there was not much along the road. As we progressed to the very long incline where a truck lane to the right exists, the shimmer of mirage came off the road. I didn't overexert the car, but soon noted a warning light on my dash cluster. I smelled something sweet and burnt. Transmission fluid. Not really flammable, but I needed to keep moving. I let my passenger know what was going on and said that I needed to find a place to pull over. On this incline, that was a non-option, so I set the emergency flashers and slowed down to a pace of about 40 miles an hour. As we came to the top of an incline, an exit to the right, named Summit something or other, was there. We exited and headed to what appeared to be a small truck stop, and it featured a prominent tall sign exclaiming EAT. The thing is, it was nearly deserted. Only one old man sat on a bench out front, and otherwise the place was looking long closed and dry. I told my passenger to stay in the car while I inspected it. She lit a cigarette and stepped out. It did not take long to find that the pan gasket for the transmission was leaking badly. I popped the front hood and measured the dipstick. No liquid showing, not good. What I did not have with me was fluid and a gasket. I spoke to the man and asked about the parts shop. I had tools with me in the trunk. He was long on slow talking, but seemed decent enough, just hanging out in front of a closed and deserted diner/gas station. He said the nearest place for parts was Las Vegas. I was in distress, and this was before cell phones were common to everyone. Corona didn't even have the row of dealerships along the highway then, and I went to speak with my passenger. There was no working payphone and no means to get any help. The old man was the odd thing here, as he got there somehow but had no car. In a few minutes, a Dodge Ram pick-em-up truck appeared. The man drove up and parked. He got out of his truck and stood about 5'10", and was maybe 60 with a head of white hair and a white cowboy hat and an amiable gut. A mature white guy who carried himself like any redneck would. In short, in my life perspective of that time, I saw no threat there. The man walked over to the old man, and they spoke for a bit. The old man gestured to us in a friendly way, and the man seemed jovial and walked over. He introduced himself as Mike, but that everyone called him Hoss. I introduced myself and my passenger, and he did nothing to seem creepy at all. We might as well have been at a social gathering with mixed ages. Hoss said his friend mentioned we needed to get to Las Vegas, and it just so happened that's where he was going. We discussed that I needed to get my passenger to her family, and that I needed to get to a parts store. But if he could just get us to the city, we'd be very grateful. He asked if we had any money, and I told him I had about $40 for gas, and was going to get money there, and had to get more anyway due to parts. I offered to pay him $60 for his troubles. He laughed and said that was more than enough, and we three piled into his truck. All went well on the drive to Las Vegas, and we all had small talk. When we reached the city, Hoss offered to go ahead and take my passenger to her parents, as they were going to pay me for my trouble, and that would pay parts, a bus to my car, and Hoss's time and trouble. We were all agreeable. We arrived to drop off my passenger, and I stepped in with her for a brief moment to speak with her parents, who gave me $300, which was a lot more than I expected, and that was more than I made in a week. So when I went back to Hoss's truck, he gestured friendly like I jump in. He asked how it went, and I told him they paid me a lot more than I expected. He seemed to brush that off and suggested we get a beverage before getting to the parts store. It was a 7-Eleven, and I offered him a soda. He thanked me, and I hopped out and got us each a super big gulp, a monster-sized cup that seemed to hold 2 liters in each cup. Getting in the truck, I passed him his drink and sat in the passenger seat. Hoss said he knew where the parts store was, and he would take me there, to which he happily agreed. I thanked him repeatedly for being such great help. He just chortled and made small talk. In a short while, he turned off a main road and started down a dirt road with nothing but a very distant something. I asked why we were on the dirt road. He offhandedly mentioned it was a shortcut. At first, this made some sense, but the road turned slightly away from the distant building, and we were now in the middle of the desert. I was feeling uneasy but stayed firm as he asked me how much I was paid. I was holding my drink and took a sip. More than my paycheck. He slammed the brakes and reached his burly arm fast around my neck and shouted, "Give me your money, or I'ma kill you." Instinct and perception took over, and I tossed the near full iced big gulp in his face and his front. His grip loosened substantially, and my right hand went for the door handle, and the door opened and I rushed out. I had gotten the element of surprise and won my freedom. Hoss yelled out profanities at me, and I yelled my suggestion of his body being buried here by me. With that, he stepped on the accelerator and tore away from me. I was okay, and he was driving madly away. But here I was in the desert, at least a few miles away from anything, on a summer's day at midday, in clothes better suited to a cool evening. I chose a direction that seemed to be the closest to me and began walking. I have no idea how long it took, but by the time I was nearing my goal, it shone as a new set of homes. I was sweating terribly and just ready to drop. I was mad, I mean really mad about what happened. As I got closer to the nearest home, I saw a man standing there who was dark-haired and lean. He was just watching me walk out of the desert in black. I walked towards him as I got into earshot, and I called out for water, please. The man was holding a shovel, and obviously wary, and as I neared him, he asked who I was and why I was there. I gave a summary, and again asked for water. His garage was open, and he grabbed a cup and ran some water into it from the spigot of the hose. He reached it to me, and I greedily took it and guzzled. As I was in the shade, and the man was talking to me, I told him the whole story and how I ended up there. A sudden thought occurred to me, and I suddenly became concerned for the passenger lady. The homeowner was more at ease with me now, though understandably unwilling to invite me inside. He had an extension for his phone in his garage and allowed me to call the woman's family. I explained what Hoss had done and asked them for a favor of picking me up. They agreed, and I gave the address for where I was. They took my caution to be on the lookout. Sometime later they arrived and picked me up. I thanked the man for his kindness. I was lucky to be close enough to someone. He said not everyone was a bad person. I was taken to a parts store, bought what I needed, and taken to a Greyhound terminal. I thanked them and bought a ticket. A while later the bus arrived and I got aboard. I asked the driver to stop in Barstow. Sitting back, I reflected on what had happened and suddenly realized I was alone, and that psycho knew where my disabled car was in an abandoned place. It was not a safe place to be, but I had to get there. Barstow was close enough to where I was going, but not close enough to walk. I later found out I would have to get off at that exit, since it was a real exit off the highway. Live and learn. So I walked to a diner that was popular with big truckers and sat down, ordered a soda and a sandwich, and a man who was seating next to me asked what my story was, as I looked out of place the way I was dressed. I explained what happened and the man introduced himself. He was a war vet with non-working legs. He had special crutches by him and said he could take me to where my car was as it was on his way. He was driving a fifth-wheel truck hauling cars. I must have looked him oddly as he laughed and said, "Don't worry, I ain't going anywhere as fast with these legs." I laughed kindly with him and agreed. He added that he would help watch over as I fixed the car, just in case this Hoss guy came back. In a short while we headed out, and true to his honor, he waited as I replaced my gasket, torqued the bolts, and added fluid. I then tested it with it running. Not the cleanest way to do it, but it was done. The old man at the store was gone. The sun was waning in the sky and my car was fixed. I thanked him again, and he told me as a soldier he kept his word, and to this day he remains the same. I felt he was honest and had a slight restoration of my faith in humanity. We both headed out at the same time, and I made my way home. This happened to me when I was 15. My dad ran a wrecker service for over-the-road truckers. Late one night we got a call that a truck had run off the road and struck a tree 20 miles south of town. So my dad and I fired up the wrecker and headed south. When we came onto the scene, the truck and the trailer had run off the road to the right and smacked a tree head-on. It was one of those 100-year-old oak trees. This was back in the day, when there was a cab over semi-trucks, or one of those without noses, or the engine is under the cab. The truck was still running, at an idle. The door was closed, but no driver was seen from the driver's window. The front driver's windshield was busted, and there was a large hole in the middle. The trailer was loaded with flat, quarter-inch steel sheets. Of course, it's pitch black, and we couldn't really see things that well when we first got there. Our impression was that the driver smacked a tree, hit his head on the windshield, and was already getting treatment somewhere else. So my dad set up the wrecker to the hook on the trailer, and he wanted me to open the cab in order to release the brakes. When I opened the door, I was greeted with the sight of the lower half of a body. When the driver hit the tree, a single sheet of steel broke free and cut through the cab, cutting the driver in half. The upper half of his body went through the windshield. I found the rest of him about 40 feet from the truck in a cornfield, and he was still grabbing the upper part of the steering wheel. It looked like he was frozen in time, still driving the truck. Needless to say, he went into a body bag with his lower half, and we worked through the night getting the truck and trailer back to town. This is one of my many experiences, having growing up in a wrecker service family. Last winter, I was driving down the freeway at night, going between suburbs of a large metropolitan area, so there were plenty of cars around, but it was maybe around midnight or so, and it had been snowing. I saw a car pulled over on the shoulder of the freeway with a guy standing next to it, clearly in need of some assistance. I saw them as I was driving past, but since it was later at night and was cold, I figured I might as well take the next exit, loop around, and see if the guy still needed help. I get there, and it's a middle-aged, working-class type of guy standing outside his pickup. He's wearing blue overalls, is slender and slightly balding, and puts off what I can only describe as a weird vibe, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. But it was one of those weird gut feelings that you aren't sure why you feel. He says that he's been having car troubles. It's from about 2 hours out of town, and that his alternator is shot, and that his battery needs a boost. I've owned a car with a shot alternator, and know that when the battery dies you need to boost it for a little while if you're going to get things running again. I tell him it's no problem, commiserate with him for a minute, and pop my hood, and he says he's going to grab his cables. When he comes back, I notice in his hand he has some sort of concealed metal object. No clue what it was. I saw it for just a brief moment, and saw that it wasn't a knife, but that it was metal and a little shorter than the length of his hand, and he was clearly trying to conceal it from my view. This all happened so fast, and I am immediately on high alert. I see for a split second as he's bringing the cables to me so that I can hook up my battery. I instantly take a step back to put some distance between us and tell him that he can hook up my battery and I'll wait in the car. All the while in instantaneous full fight or flight mode, getting ready to block an attack if he were to lunge at me. He doesn't, and starts connecting the cables to my battery, and as I'm sitting in my car, I start to wonder if I was imagining things as he connects the battery, and we both wait for the battery to charge. Maybe it was just something that was bundled in with the cables, and that he just had in his hand. Perhaps I misread the situation as dangerous. After a few minutes he goes to start his car, shouts that it isn't working, and then walks back towards my car while he waits in front of mine. After a few minutes of waiting, he puts his head back under the hood of my car to fiddle with the cables. All the while, I'm watching him intently to make sure he doesn't come to the car window because I was still spooked. He shouts some things about how it isn't working and asks me to come and take a look. I open my window a bit and casually tell him not to worry and that it's probably going to take some time. Luckily, I can just barely see my battery in the dark. Through the gap, under the propped hood of my car through the windshield directly in front of me. I see him fiddle with the cables and hear him shout again that it isn't working and for me to come out. Then I see him slip the metal object I had seen earlier and see him touch it to my battery terminal as sparks shoot out from where he touched it. He starts yelling and jumps back, and I immediately jump out of my car and tell him that something came up and that I needed to go now. I honestly don't remember much of what he was trying to say as I cut him off or what exactly I said. I just remember saying that I needed to get out of there without taking my eyes off him for even half a second. I don't remember even how the cables came off my battery. Did I pull them out? Were they already off? But I slammed that hood, jumped in my car and drove off. I still have no idea what his plan was, no clue what he was trying to do or what on earth he was trying to make happen. But I do know for a fact that what I saw him do was in no way what he was telling me he was going to do. But as I left him there and drove off, I was practically pinching myself, trying to make heads or tails of what just happened. And I can't stress this enough, that the guy just gave off the weirdest vibes, like the hills have eyes kind of weird vibes. Maybe he was planning on trying to short my battery so that I was stuck there. But to this day, I wonder if I encountered some sort of mass murderer who had been planning on kidnapping someone at the side of a freeway as they stopped to help. Who knows, but either way it was strange as hell. He right spooked me, and I noped the hell away from that dude as fast as humanly possible. I still wish I had gotten a license plate or something to give to the cops, but in that moment, the only thing going through my mind was to remove myself from that situation as fast as humanly possible. My brother is a truck driver, and as you can imagine, being on the road so often leads you to see some of the most terrifying things life has to offer. This one story he shared with me really shook him up, and it started when he pulled into a rest stop one fall afternoon. The fluorescent glows of the gas station lights illuminated the scene of a middle-aged woman in a vibrant pink Jeep surrounded by a flurry of small dogs on leashes. Intrigued by the spectacle, my brother watched for a moment before continuing with his routine. He climbed back into his truck, the hum of the engine providing a backdrop for his thoughts as he merged back onto the freeway. But minutes later, the tranquility of the drive was shattered by the sudden appearance of the pink Jeep, which was hurtling past him at alarming speed. Before he could fully process what was happening, the vehicle veered sharply to the left, tires screeching as it collided with the dirt median. The Jeep somersaulted through the air, a whirlwind of metal, before coming to a rest in a crumpled heap. As you can imagine, my brother was shocked and slammed on the brakes and leapt out of the truck, adrenaline pumping through his veins. Amidst the wreckage, the woman lay motionless in a shadow ditch, water seeping around her. Her head barely above the surface, she muttered about her beloved dogs. Heart pounding, my brother rushed to her side, his mind racing as he assessed the situation. Around them, the lifeless form of the dogs lay strewn across the ground in pieces, a disturbing sight. It wasn't before long that the ambulance was sent for the woman, who was still pleading for her dogs as she was taken to the hospital. My brother never knew her fate. My brother never did discover her fate. I'm a long-haul trucker. I see and deal with a lot of weird and scary stuff. There was this time I was traveling up US 93 in Nevada, heading to Portland, Oregon for a delivery. It was around 1:30 a.m., and I needed to stop and log my half-hour break. I found a wide spot and pulled off, did my logs up, and made myself a sandwich. While I was eating said sandwich, I noticed a vehicle pull in behind me. I did not get concerned about it, but kept an eye on it while I ate. Then it got strange. I noticed a figure in the headlight of the vehicle approach the back driver's side of my trailer, stop, and looked like they were rubbing the backside of my trailer with their hands. It was suspicious, so I got my pistol out of the lockbox back in the sleeper, cocked and locked it, and slid it behind my waistband and proceeded to climb out of the rig. I walked about 10 feet, keeping my hand on the butt of my pistol, and flicked my flashlight on and aimed it at the person. It was a man, a weird-looking fellow in a dirty, whitish trench coat, long, straggly hair and bald on top. He was rubbing something on the side of my trailer. I hollered at him to stop what he was doing, and he looked up at me, smirked, and without turning his gaze off me, starts walking towards me. I back my way to my door, keeping my hands on my pistol but not pulling it out. I did not feel like my life was in danger at the time. I opened my door and climbed into the rig, shut the door, and locked it. The dude walks up by my door, looks at me, still smirking. I'm thinking this dude is off his rockers, and my half-hour break is over and it's time to go. However, while I'm looking down at him and getting ready to turn the key, I feel my truck rock. I jump and look at my driver's side mirror. Nothing. Then I look over to check my passenger side mirror, and there on my step, face pressed against my passenger side window, is a freaky, perfect replica of an old witch, smiling with a rotten tooth, cocking her head left, then right, and fogging up my window. Needless to say, I about sucked my seat up to my arse, but that's not the end of it. The dude then jumps up on my driver's side step and proceeds to start licking the window. Then the witch lady starts smacking the window with the palm of her hand over and over. The dude starts telling me to open up, that they're friendly, and insists to know what I have in the trailer. Now I feel threatened. I pull the pistol out and the chick immediately disappears off the passenger side step. The dude laughs, jumps up and down on the step, then grins, touches his finger to his nose and jumps off my step. I fired my truck up and took the hell off. Never did see any headlights following me, thank God. Disturbing travelers, let's not meet again. Many years ago, I was doing what is called a meet and turn. This is where a driver that is domiciliated out of a city will drive halfway to its destination, while a driver domiciliated out of that destination will drive halfway with a load that is destined for my city. We meet in a parking lot, switch trailers and drive back home. I had been on this run for a few months and found that I always got to the beat point about an hour before the other driver. It was a dark and empty dirt lot at 3 a.m., so I would stretch out across the seat and take a short nap. One night, about 10 minutes into my nap, I was awoken by a barking dog. I tried to ignore it, but it carried on for several minutes and got louder as the dog got closer. Soon it became apparent the dog was right outside my truck barking at me. Okay, either this dog is Lassie and trying to alert me of something, or else he's just a pain in the ass and I'll need to throw something at him to scare him off. It's important to note, the barking had been going on for a good 10 minutes at this point. So I sat up and looked out the window. Standing there, mere inches on the other side of the glass, was a man of about 35. He was a large fellow, and it was he barking at me. His eyes were crazy, and he was frothing at the mouth a little. This scene really held my full attention for a moment. The sheer creepiness of this struck me. Gently, and making an absolute minimum of sudden movement, I reached down and started my truck and slowly pulled away. He chased me, much like you might expect an angry dog to do, barking the whole time. Needless to say, it played hell with my power naps from then on. Back in the good old late 90s, my dad was a long-haul trucker. He would leave on Sunday night and usually not be back until late Friday or sometimes even Saturday, if he came home at all. My mother would, understandably, get annoyed by this, so once in a while my dad would take the whole family, my mother, younger sister of 4, and myself at 14. So we'd been out in either western Texas or possibly New Mexico, and we're heading back east, probably to one of the Carolinas honestly, but I don't recall for sure. This was a usual route for my dad, and we spent a lot of time driving through Texas. So we were near Dallas, maybe a few miles east of, and traffic going both ways is gridlocked, all 6 lanes. At points, we'll move for a bit, but rarely break 35 miles an hour, and it's excruciatingly slow. We are stuck in this for 3 hours. The CB radio is dead quiet, which is strange, and finally we catch a break, and traffic is starting to move again. About 15 minutes later, we found out why traffic had backed up. In the ditch in the middle of the highway is a completely burnt-out shell of a car, what appeared to be a station wagon. Pulling out into the highway, leaving the scene, was a line of 3 hearses. To this day, it's one of the most heartbreaking and disturbing things I have ever witnessed. This story takes place in northeast Oklahoma around 2009. I was 14 years old at the time, and back then my aunt and I did everything together. She was my best friend, my rock, my everything really. Our favorite thing to do in our boring rural town was just go driving around. I believe I had just finished school for the summer, as it was May, and she'd offered to take me on a celebratory drive around town. In my hometown, there's an old mental hospital that had been closed since the 1990s. It's located in more of a ruralish area, and I've always been fascinated by it. And she was too. She even worked there as a teenager. There's a prison located extremely close to it with guards in white trucks frequently driving the roads and preventing people from trying to sneak into the abandoned mental hospital. We both decided on driving around this abandoned mental hospital. It's just too cool and creepy. There's a cemetery where they mass buried many of the patients just beyond the hospital and the doctors' houses. Past the cemetery, everything gets rural. You're far from town by this point, and there's only a single lane, lone, winding road. We're driving, having fun, just talking about anything and everything. It's late afternoon by this point, probably 4:30. It's just like any old drive we had been on so many times. That's when I looked in the rearview mirror and saw a 90s white Jeep Cherokee behind us. It had seemingly come out of nowhere. We both shrugged it off and thought it might be a prison guard or something. It became unnerving the longer we drove. He never turned onto a side road, he just kept following us. I remember my aunt playing it calm, but I knew she was not fully freaking out. She kept asking, "Is he still following us?" There were times when I didn't see him and I'd say, "No, I don't see him." Then in the next minute he'd be right there behind us. He got close enough at one point that I could see his face. He was very big and bulky, about middle-aged, and I assumed white with a hat, wearing Carrera sunglasses, and his dashboard was covered in junk. We kept on driving further on this road through the middle of nowhere. There were several times we'd lose him, and we would feel so relieved. At one point we came to a railroad crossing on a hill. After we passed it, I didn't see him. We were so happy, and there he was again. He followed us for what felt like hours. If we sped up, so would he. I still get chills at the memory of looking in the rearview mirror and seeing his face. We were also in such a rural area that we could not get any cell phone signal. Finally, we emerged onto a highway. We had no idea where we were, but just so elated to get to a main road. We turned onto it, and my aunt sped off. I remember we got back to my mum's house and were full of fear and adrenaline. We frantically said we were out driving and this guy just started following us, and my aunt finally confessed how scared she was. We never told the police or anything, and my mum thought we were making a big deal out of nothing. But it was terrifying to be out in the middle of nowhere with no cell phone service and a strange car following you for an extended period of time. I remember we spoke afterwards about it, like what if she'd run out of gas or her car broke down? What the hell would we have done? I'm glad we never had to find out. My mum is a trucker, and this is her story. She was driving through Arizona when she saw what she thought were leaves blowing across the road in the distance. This puzzled her, since there's mostly pine trees in northern Arizona. When she finally got to the leaves, she realized that they were migrating tarantulas, thousands of them. There were so many of them that her truck was sliding on their guts and she had to slow down. She stopped at the first truck stop and told her co-driver to fuel up, as he was sleeping at the time, because she wasn't going to step foot outside her truck after what she just saw. Her co-driver was past, since it was technically his off time, and he thought she was crazy, until he saw the tarantula guts and legs caking the inside well of the truck. She also outran a tornado in the Midwest. She was about to pull over and take cover, until she saw another big rig that was parked on the side of the road get tossed a couple of 100 yards like a toy. She called me and told me that she thought she was going to die, and she wanted her last words to be, "I love you" to me. She pulled off the freeway and got into a Walmart, where she ran into the shelter, where all the staff and customers were taking refuge. After the tornado passed, they stepped out of the basement and into daylight, since the Walmart was destroyed. She has many stories like this. Trucking is 90% boredom, 10% insane stuff like this. I was 16 and had just gotten my license, and I had a part-time job, so I was able to buy a car. It was a super old car and quite unreliable, but I was the only one in my friend group that had a car, so I was always the driver. Well, one night, after working, I offered to drive my friends home because it started snowing. One of my friends lived around 20 miles out of town. I'd never been there before, but I figured I'd be able to find my way. It was all pretty much dark dirt roads in the country, and this was before the era of smartphones being commonplace. I dropped her off and was sure I'd be able to find my way back to the highway. Of course, I ended up getting lost. I had a track phone, and the service absolutely sucked. I pulled over to the side of the road, trying to think back to the turns I took, when I hear the car door open. I look over to see this creepy dude attempting to get in. He had come out of nowhere from a field next to where I parked. I freaked out and took off. A few days later at work, my friend who I had dropped off told me that an old man and his wife were murdered by someone breaking in. Scared the crap out of me, but I never told anyone because they wouldn't have believed me. The guy ended up getting caught on the same night. This actually happened about 5 years ago in a random country road in Tennessee. It was pitch black darkness, and the only things around were fields, hills, and me. Not a single house. I was getting really tired since the day before I just flew from Washington to Atlanta and was driving from Atlanta to northern Indiana, and out in the middle of nowhere I see a dog in the grass. And normally this is fine, but its eyes weren't glowing from my headlights, which for some reason really made me feel unsettled. The next thing I know, it charged for the tire of my trailer, snarling and barking. Thank God I didn't hit it, and I looked back and it was gone. As bad as it sounds, even if I did hit it, I probably wouldn't have stopped because I was in the middle of nowhere with no service. I've heard a lot of people finding some way to get people to stop their commute in the middle of nowhere and just rob or kill them. It was midnight, and there was no way I was taking a chance. My dad told me and my brothers this story when we were growing up, and it always stuck with me, particularly on long drives when I'm feeling a bit sleepy. The first time I remember hearing it was after I asked him if angels were real. probably around 7. He drove trucks decades ago before I was born, and before labor laws around limits and brakes were more standardized. I'm assuming it's different now. He'd fairly regularly accept calls that would extend his shift where he was driving 24, 36 hours or more without a break, longer than a quick bathroom or food stop. My dad has a pretty mathematical brain. He's the type to make up logic puzzles out of something completely mundane just for fun. Whenever we were driving around town, he'd regularly ask me things like, how long would it take us to get from the house to the store if we're going at 30 miles an hour but had to stop for 5 minutes in the middle because a family of kittens were crossing the road? He'd come up with similar equations for himself while he was driving solo that involved things he was seeing like the odometer, mileage marker, the time, and then he could test his speed based on the equation. One night, after having already driven a particularly long day, he noticed his eyes getting droopier, and the whole roll down the window and blast the music up didn't seem to be helping much. It was a rainy night, and on a pretty windy mountain road without a shoulder to pull over safely. So he started doing those logic games out loud in order to keep alert and awake. He was saying something to the effect of, I just passed mile marker 146. So what time will it be when I reach 200 if I'm going at 55? Then his eyes closed, took a deep breath, and felt his head do the nod-jerking thing which woke him up with a gasp. He opened his eyes to see he was driving straight towards mile marker 158, which would have sent his whole truck tumbling down a random-ass mountain ravine. He was able to correct the course safely back, but it was only a matter of seconds between that reality and absolute certain death. He insists to this day that he slept through 12 miles of windy mountain road, going over 60 miles an hour, only to wake up at the last moment between life and death. The story usually ends with him tearing up and saying, I don't know if there are angels, but I know there's something bigger going on in this universe than our human brains have been able to understand yet. If I wouldn't have woken up right when I did, you kids wouldn't be here today, and that's something that feels pretty damn close to spiritual. A good friend of mine told me this story years ago. He's the stereotypical big bad trucker. I've seen some weird stuff with him while driving in South Texas along the border. He never batted an eye, but while telling me this story he had goosebumps and a concerned expression on his face, which from this guy is about the equivalent of a trembling lip and crapping himself. I'll tell this story in the first person, as that's the way he shared it with me. Years ago in the late 90s, I was on my way from the house, Central Texas, heading to Laredo to pick up a load. It was early morning, maybe 4 or 5, and I had just come off a string of days at home, so I knew I wasn't tired. I'm on one of those 2-lane winding roads in the absolute middle of nowhere, when I see something on the side of the road at the edge of my high beams. At first, I just thought it was roadkill, as is usually the case. But when I get closer, I see that it is roadkill, and there's someone crouching over the deer carcass. I remember thinking either this guy is taking the antlers as a trophy, or he's absolutely sick. As I get closer still, I can now see that this guy is eating the deer. He's pulling chunks of meat from the stomach and bringing it up to his face. At this point, he stops mid-motion and looks up at me. Not at the truck, but at me. It stands up, and that's when I see it's huge, brown, and covered in hair. I remember thinking at this point, oh crap, and thinking it's standing on the tiny shoulder looking at me. By this point, maybe 3 seconds have passed, and I'm about to the point of the road he's standing in. I didn't even think of stopping. In fact, I'm starting to lay on it to get the hell out of there. And as I'm passing it, it's looking at me, not at the truck. It's looking through the driver's side windshield at me. He obviously had the intelligence to know that there's a driver in there, and knows that's where I'm sitting. As I start to pass him, I can still see its head above the hood of an old needle-nosed Pete. Old truck design, where the hood goes straight out from the windshield, known for being tall and difficult to see around. This thing is a giant. I remember seeing what appeared to be human intelligence in his eyes. It scared the crap out of me. I was at a truck stop in Arizona. I was pulling through the fuel island, and right as I was about to leave, roughly 15 cop cars came flying into the parking lot with a SWAT van. They surrounded a truck that was already parked for the night. I heard later that the driver had lost a tire or something off his trailer, and it had killed a guy on the side of the road. Don't know how true that story was, but it sounded plausible. At the old Flying J in El Paso, I had pulled through the fuel islands and was filling out logs and whatnot after filling up, when someone started screaming for help on the CB radio. It's not unusual to hear kids messing around or whatever, but this sounded like a full-grown man and didn't sound fake. It only happened for about 15 to 20 seconds and then silence. Some people started asking the guy where he was, but we never got a response. Suddenly, another big rig in the parking lot starts to take off right as a few cop cars pull into the truck parking area. The big rig takes out a smaller sign and then jumps a curb out onto the service road for I-10. Turns out a student got pissed at his instructor and stabbed him before leading the chops on a short, high-speed chase. When I was 17, I was driving in one of those small towns without the community feel. It was a toxic place rampant with drug addiction and crime. I learned from a young age to watch my back and where to not go past dark, or ever. This town held a lot of trauma for me, some trauma even scarier than the incident I'm about to share. I left this town a few short months after this happened, and I would never think of going back after this point. For context, I am female and was working a lot and finishing up my senior year, and we didn't have a working washer or dryer at home, so I had to go to the laundromat to do my laundry. I lived on the outside of town. It took a whole 5 minutes to get into town, but we were so secluded and there were no street lights, and I lived on a street between two mountains. We were down the street from this abandoned dairy farm. We had acres to ourselves and we were really secluded. It was so dark out there, and there was only my street and the cross street to get to my street. So, you knew when a car was on the road. One afternoon, I found some time to take my laundry to the laundromat and took my mum and brother's laundry with me, so my mum wouldn't have to do it during her work week. This meant I had 3 times the laundry to do, and it would take longer at the laundromat, but there was a good Hastings next door, so I didn't worry too much as long as I was able to leave before dark, as it wasn't a very good idea to be out at that time. By the time I left, the sun was almost down, so it all worked out, and by the time I was on the cross street to get to my street, it was completely dark, and I was all alone out there. I thought I turned onto my street, and within seconds there was someone behind me, as close as they could be to my vehicle without hitting me, and they had their brights on. This confused me, as I had seen no other cars on the street before I turned onto my own. It was like their lights were off until they were directly behind me. This gave me a pit in my stomach, so I sped up, but they kept up behind me. This was a windy, dark road, and my headlights were poor, so I was really starting to get anxious. I made a judgment call and drove right past my driveway. I didn't feel right possibly alerting some creep to where I live with my mum and baby brother, especially since the cell reception was so poor out there. The person behind me was still as close as they could get to my bumper, and I kept speeding up. I knew that up ahead there was a fork in the road. Going straight would lead me to the downtown area, and it's the way people go when they're heading that way. To go to the left You entered a residential area with only a few homes and a road that only really allowed one car at a time. At the last second, I turned onto this street without turning my blinker on, in hopes that the car behind me would keep going straight. They turned with me. By this point, I was very scared, but still hopeful that maybe the car behind me lived in the area. We were going close to 50 miles an hour now, and just kept speeding up, as the car behind me really wasn't backing off, but staying as close as they could. They stayed so close that I couldn't even tell what was the make of their vehicle, or whether they were driving a car or SUV or truck. I definitely couldn't tell who was in it. I couldn't understand why they weren't backing off, and I was afraid that if I slowed down, they'd rear-end me. All of a sudden, I see a home directly in front, and I had to turn left or crash into the home in front. Luckily, my car made the turn. I kept going and made a left to get onto the road that leads downtown. The car was still behind me. They didn't live in that neighborhood, and at this point I'm sure they're following me, and I make the decision to drive to the sheriff's office, but I'm not sure how to get there. We're going around 60 in a 25-mile-an-hour zone, and we start to pass a street that I finally recognize that will lead to the sheriff's office. So I turn, but I turn so late that I might as well have made a U-turn. Finally, the car behind me can't make the turn and they keep driving. I drove around and made a lot of turns to ensure the car wouldn't end up driving behind me again. Finally, I pulled my car over and cried. I was safe this time, but I returned home terrified, and it changed the way I drive to this day. I moved to a more populated city, and I live in a large apartment complex. But I will still drive past my apartment when I get a weird feeling about someone behind me. Anytime someone pulls into the apartment behind me, I drive right past my apartment and circle the complex until I can park with no one watching. My paranoia possibly saved me, and my mum and baby brother, from something that could have been so much worse. Pay attention to those behind you. Waste gas and drive past your home if you're scared. It might save your life. I'm not a trucker, but a dispatcher. We had a driver who had, shall we say, an odor problem. I'm not talking like body odor like sweat. I'm talking like stale urine. Any time he'd come into the dispatch office, it was a race to have him leave again. The kind of putrid tang that would make you gag immediately and completely involuntarily, regardless of your best efforts. The driver was a rather heavy-set guy, nice enough but a little slow. We let it go until we started getting complaints from customers about the smell. Now this driver was a flatbed driver, meaning most of his deliveries were onto construction sites, job sites, steel and lumber mills. Therefore 90% were outdoors, and in the company of rough and tough dudes who otherwise wouldn't give a damn what you smelled like. We get a couple of phone calls a week from a job foreman saying that they wouldn't take this guy onto their site anymore because even outdoors the smell was so bad for the workers. We started delicately attempting to bring it up, trying to urge proper hygiene. He claimed he showered every day or at least every other day at worst, and that he just smelt like that and has had the problem for as long as he could remember. There was nothing he could do. At some point he had to bring his truck in for maintenance. It was a company truck. He didn't own it. But we don't rotate trucks, so we had the same one for months. Something had to be checked in the gear shift, so the mechanic had to get inside the truck. Upon climbing into the cab, the mechanic promptly did a 180 and puked out the driver's side door. It was then that the big piss bucket was discovered. I'm not talking like a Gatorade bottle or something that he took a leak in once, when he didn't have time to stop. I'm talking like a job site shop bucket, filled nearly to the brim with urine. The floor around it was wet, indicating that part of it had splashed out. The inside of the cab, I'm told, because I was too chicken to go anywhere near it, smelled like him times 10. It was basically pure Concentrated evil. The walls of the cab had a slight yellow/brown dull sheen. We fired the driver, using the complaints from the customers as the excuse, and then parked the truck outside in the yard, doors and windows open for a week just to dull it. Then had a guy with a ghetto-pieced hazmat suit, rubber gloves, rubber boots, mask, rain slicker, etc., had to go in there and douse the whole thing in bleach and cleaners. And yet, no matter what they did to it, they could not get rid of the smell. That truck sat outside in our yard for a full year, windows and doors standing open, rain, snow, blustery wind, it just sat wide open to the elements. One day a year later, the boss decided to close it up and see how it was. It was just as bad as the day they tried to clean it. He scrapped the truck a week later. I drove an old SUV back in college. After school, I drove home, which is about a half-hour drive away. I was getting dressed to come home when the car alarm went off, so I rushed out and discovered the car door open with the radio head unit and speakers gone. I was thinking, this guy works fast. Reported it to the police, and after a few weeks they found the thief and asked me to go to the police station. At the police station, I was asked a few questions, and the officer told me I had to hear something from the thief. When I confronted him, he told me that he was able to get into my car at the car park near my school, and that I unexpectedly arrived, so he dove and lied flat in the third row. So I was driving home with an unknown passenger all the time. When I arrived home and locked the car, he removed the items, and when he opened the door, that's when the alarm triggered. The best part is what happened at the police station, because a bunch of the cops were waiting to see my reaction. He said he was scared witless. He was just a regular car thief. His concern was that I would be bringing him far away and he wouldn't be able to get home. Since he was just an amateur thief, when he opened the door and triggered the alarm, he panicked and left some of his belongings, which were used by the police to identify him. In any case, I hope to never see him again. My dad is a truck driver, and around 20 years ago, while resting at the side of the road, he woke up in the morning seeing that his entire trailer was robbed empty. My dad's a heavy sleeper, but his cargo could not have been stolen with at least a forklift, and everyone would have woken up by a forklift unloading a trailer. My dad suspected the robbers used a pump to get some kind of chloroform into his cabin to make sure he couldn't wake up. And my mum went crazy when they heard this story, for good reason. What if they used too much gas or whatever? Or my dad, who's ex-military, had woken up and tried to play the hero. It could have gone wrong in a lot of ways. The police, who were informed at first, thought my dad was in on it, and we can assure you that almost no cargo transported by an ordinary truck driver without security is worth police investigation. Having the police go through your entire house and belongings is something you don't wish on your worst enemy, in my opinion. It's humiliating, and the entire neighborhood sees you as a criminal. On top of that, you have to work 6-day weeks, and every free day is taken up with the ongoing investigation. It was definitely not a good time to be a deep sleeper. Myself and 2 friends had to drive from Laredo, Texas to Baton Rouge one night in my Ford van. It was around 2 a.m. There's a particularly long and dark section of the highway just outside Laredo, no buildings, towns or lights, for about 50 miles. I was in the right lane coming up to a truck and pulled out into the left passing lane. As I was slowly overtaking this long truck, my peripheral vision caught a sudden movement of this big truck towards the right shoulder. I saw the truck was swerving to avoid hitting a person dressed in all white. White face, whose arms were folded across the chest and eyes were closed as they walked across the highway. I swerved to the left and barely missed this ghostly-looking person with my passenger mirror, and I can still remember seeing the eyes were closed. That's how close we came to this person. I'm not sure if they were real or not, but I know that the other person saw them too. I just drove on. A news that happened in my city a few years ago was about a woman who had been quite depressed and saw a semi parked on an off-ramp and decided that to take her own life, she would lay underneath one of the tires and just wait for him to drive off. No one really knows for sure how long she'd been laying there until someone found what was left of her. But the thought that the trucker probably never knew that he aided in someone taking their life is a really horrible thought. My grandfather was in the Air Force, and one night when he was driving a truck back to base, he saw a woman standing on the side of the road in a long white dress at around 2 a.m. He circled back to ask if she needed help, but by the time he got there was no one to be found. He searched for her as well for about an hour before giving up and decided to leave it alone. When he went on his way, he had a strong feeling that he needed to switch lanes, as he was on the road alone in the middle of nowhere at night and had no idea why. And just ahead of the road was a broken down truck with no hazards on that he would have hit and probably killed by if he'd have stayed on the lane he had been in. To this day, he's convinced that that woman was there to give him a warning. I used to drive I-80 between San Francisco and Cheyenne, Wyoming, a lot. It's about 16 to 20 hours of driving depending on weather and traffic. Anyway, one time I got out at a rest stop to stretch my legs and take a leak, and maybe buy a Coke. I go to the bathroom and there are 3 beefy bearded dudes all naked from the waist down, just laying on the ground in a daisy chain. I looked at them and 2 of them looked at me. I just said, sorry, and walked right back out. Oddly, all I could think of was, wow, that floor is probably filthy. A second time I was driving at night, and the car starts making odd grinding noises, like I ran over something that got stuck. It's about 2 a.m. and I pull into a rest stop. It's well lit, and I wake up my buddy who was sleeping. I explain it to him as we get out of the car, and we both hear what sounds like kids crying. There are no other cars at the rest stop, but we frequently heard stories about children trafficking and kidnapping nearby, so we decided to check it out. We grab our flashlights and head towards the noise, which is coming from the bathrooms. As we get closer, we realize it's coming from the women's bathroom, and it's a low, dull sobbing. We're prepared for the worst, and walk in, expecting to see someone brutally beaten. But what we see is nothing. The sound is there and still clearly coming from the room, but the room is empty. We turn on the lights, still nothing. Check each stall, the trash can, nothing. Even start looking for where the hell it's coming from. Nothing. Is it a hidden speaker? Are we on candid camera? What the hell's going on? My buddy climbs up one of the stalls to get to the top window in the rest stop, which is vented out and open. He closes it, and the noise stops completely. Opens it and there's no more noise. We sit there for a few seconds staring at each other, and he shrugs. Then the window slams shut again without him touching it. We were out of that restroom in seconds. The noise starts up about 10 seconds later as we get to the car, and we're tearing out of the parking lot within 10 more seconds. The grinding noise is still there, so this time I pull over a few miles later at a Flying J truck stop, well lit, sometimes occupied. There are a few truckers there, no other civilians. We check under the vehicle, and there's a red and silver piece of metal wedged between that part of the vehicle and the road, about half an inch or so off the ground. So, with us within the vehicle, it must have been grinding against the ground. We can't remove it by hand. It's really wedged in there. So we kick at it to bend it and figure we'll remove it when we get back. A week later, I had my mechanic take it out while he was doing a servicing. Turns out it was part of a kid's tricycle, the red area where someone could stand. I don't know why, and I don't think they were connected or anything, but for those moments, it totally messed me up. This happened to my mum's friend. One day the friend and her sister were driving on a freeway, but the car crashed and flipped and rolled over 5 lanes. My mum's friend was the only one conscious, and she was trapped under the steering wheel, and her sister's head was bleeding badly. She said a normal-looking man wearing white appeared out of nowhere, came up to them, and took off his shirt to wrap around the sister's head, and then he left. When the paramedics arrived, they asked who wrapped the sister's head, and she told them. The paramedics asked where he went, and she pointed to the direction he walked. The paramedics said they'd just come from that direction and no one was on the road for miles. They also said that he wrapped her head in such a perfect way that she would have bled out had he not done so. This didn't happen to me, but my father told me last week about a few years ago when he was driving a road train here in Queensland, Australia. It was him and 3 other road trains, I think, and he was the second guy in line. Some guy tried to overtake all of them before the overtaking lane ended. This lane wasn't very long, about 1 kilometer, and they were few and far between along this road. Now this guy had run out of room by the time he had gotten to the truck at the front, and so he went off the road and rolled his car. The trucks all stopped, and my father got out and ran towards the car, which was now on fire. The first truck driver was much closer to the car than my father was, due to these trucks being a good 100 meters long. When Dad got there, the truck driver just had his hands in the air to say, "Nope, I can't handle this." What he had seen was the man still conscious, flailing about in the car burning alive. Dad didn't want to see something so horrid that he didn't look, but he was still haunted by the fact that there was a man alive 1 minute ago driving past him, but was now in the burning car that he saw ahead. The truck driver still has PTSD today and can't get over it and feels terrible, despite the fact it was 100% definitely not his fault. Driving back from the road trip, someone tried overtaking my father again on that same stretch of road, not 2 kilometers away from the night before. There were police up ahead, and the guy was up to about 200 kilometers an hour just to get ahead of Dad before the lane ended. So he slams on the brakes just before he can get seen by the coppers, and Dad says he barely braked in time to not send him flying ahead, due to road trains having a much harder time braking than a car does. They get pulled over, and my dad abused the hell out of this guy because he was still upset about the night before, and he sure as hell didn't want to see that again, and the guy acted like he had no idea what he did. I have never seen my dad afraid, but I could see in his eyes how scared he was when he told me this, because that moment terrified him so much that he could have been the guy who had taken another man's life so quickly. I hope that people can understand that trucks, especially road trains, don't have the same capability as cars. You should know how to act around them and how they work. And for anyone wondering what a road train is, imagine an old-looking, generally all-round gargantuan-sized semi-truck hauling 3, sometimes 4, normal-sized trailers at the same time. Yeah, hauling that much stuff, of course it's not going to be able to stop as fast as your 1994 Honda Civic. This happened around 7 years ago. At the time I worked in a job that was about a 45-minute drive away on a good day. It was a drive along little country roads to get to this isolated country town. But the pay was good, and the benefits worked for me. Each night on my way home, I would drive down the main street of the town to an intersection, turning right to head home. This one night, I drove down to this intersection and waited for the lights to turn, when suddenly and unexpectedly, I hear a rap on my passenger window. I turned to see these two men staring at me through the window of their car, both kind of scruffy, the driver looking really angry. Wondering what was going on, I lowered my window. The driver didn't even let me talk. "Why'd you cut me off back there?" I was confused, not having seen another car when I pulled out. "I didn't." He looked even more angry at my denial. "Yes, you did. Back on Turnpike Lane, we nearly crashed." I didn't come down Turnpike Lane. I was in the parking area at the top of the street and turned down from another road. It must have been someone with a similar car, as my car has a very distinctive colour, but I've seen a few like it around. "You're a liar. Don't believe you." At this point, he was getting redder and redder, and his friend chips in. "Why are you so nervous if it ain't you?" "'Cause your friend looks really angry and I have an anxiety disorder. Plus, you're two men accosting a young woman on her own." At this point, there's a beep from behind me. We're holding up traffic. I pull off, ignoring a roar from him. However, as I was driving, I heard a prolonged beep from behind me and saw him following me in the mirror. He must have cut into my lane to follow me. I began to become really frightened as they followed me towards a main road. Wondering what I should do, a set of traffic lights turned red ahead of me, and I slowed, panicking. I quickly locked my doors in case, but the next thing I knew, he was pounding on my car door in an attempt to open it. I don't remember any of this, but I found out after that he had some sort of hammer in his hands, and he broke my car window, attempted to pull me out of the car by my hair, and hitting me once when he couldn't get me out. I think he must have knocked me out, because the next thing I know, a couple was checking my pulse and trying to stem the bleeding from a cut on my forehead. Apparently, this couple saw him pulling out past me, nearly colliding with the traffic light. In the end, he was caught. He pleaded not guilty in court, and I had to take the stand. It was proven via CCTV footage that I wasn't the driver he nearly collided with. He is in jail still, all over road rage and a case of mistaken identity. Many years ago, when I was a trucker, I had something very frightening happen to me. I was driving this particularly long and desolate stretch of highway. The roads were completely straight and the land completely flat. It was an incredibly boring drive with not much to see but forest on either side. Suddenly, up ahead, in the darkness, I see what appears to be a shape forming in the road. I squint to see if I could see it any clearer, and it appears to be a baby's pram. I just about swerve lanes in time to avoid it and manage to get my truck to a complete stop, when suddenly a thought crosses my mind. An old colleague of mine once shared a story that people out in the middle of nowhere will put odd things out in the road for you to either hit them or stop and check what they are. And when you do stop and leave your cab, they will rush you, do who knows what to you, maybe harm, kill, or leave you there, and steal your truck and all its contents. That thought flashed before my eyes in that moment, and I made the split decision to start my truck again and keep going. Just as I'm starting to roll away, I look in the rearview mirror, and I notice a few people start to leave the woods and just stare at me. I put my foot to the floor, and I'm glad to still be here. Who knows what would have happened if I'd have left my cab that day. My dad used to be a truck driver in the UK. I remember that he would have to be at the Dover docks really early to start getting the loads to where they needed to go. I don't remember what his destination was, just that he had a really long drive ahead of him. Anyway, he tells me the story. One day he's picked up a load. It's still horribly early, and he has a very long drive ahead of him. He has to drive through some pretty isolated parts of the country to get to where he needs to go on this particular trip, and it's one he didn't do very often. There's part of the journey towards the end that requires the use of country lanes, something I don't think you'd need to do nowadays, but I digress. He's driving along the middle of nowhere in the dead of morning. There's absolutely no one out, not a soul, when suddenly, far up ahead, he sees something. It appears to be a person limping at the side of the road. Now, as you probably know, trucks take a notoriously longer amount of time than cars to slow down because of the weight of the cargo they carry. My dad, wondering who would be limping and if this person needs help, starts to slow his vehicle down. As he does so, he looks out of the passenger window, rolls it down, and asks the person if they need a hand. The guy just ignores him and just carries on limping. My dad puts the truck into a complete stop, jumps out, and goes over to talk to the man. When he's just about to reach the man, he goes to ask him if he's okay, and before his very eyes, the man disappears into thin air, as if his body were less substantial than smoke. Within an instant, he's gone, and my dad just about loses his mind. Whenever he shares this story, he tries to impress upon me the amount of fear he had in that moment, because not only did he see the man when he was far away, he saw him close up, and then saw him turn to nothing. He didn't know how to express that, and made it to the depot shivered, told his boss that he was feeling incredibly unwell, and came straight home. He didn't go back to work for a week. He was that shaken up. I don't know what it was he saw that day, and neither does he, as he's never really one to believe in the paranormal, but it's the closest he's ever come to believing in something, and he's sure it must have been the soul of someone who departed this world long ago, maybe injured on that same road. It often leaves me wondering. This story happened to my dad in the early 70s. He was a long-haul truck driver. I don't remember where he started from, but I do know that he was going to end up in Denver, Colorado, which is where we lived at the time. So, my dad was driving. It was a long stretch of road when he came upon a traffic jam. There had been a pretty messed up accident, and traffic was backed up for miles. He was going to be there a while, so he turned off the engine and just waited patiently, turned on the radio and began to chill. That's when he gets a knock on the side of his window. He looks down and sees this skinny kid, no older than about 20, who's begging and pleading with him to take him. He really needed a ride. He asked my dad in which direction he was going, and he told him he was going to Denver, and the kid said that would be amazing. My dad never said yes, but the kid kind of saw it as an invitation. So the kid goes round and starts opening the side door. For a few moments, my dad debates whether he should lock the door and tell the kid to get lost, or just let him in and be a good Samaritan. Well, like I said, this was still in the days of hitchhiking, and he thinks what the heck. He could use the company. It's going to be a few hours till he gets there, and it'll keep him awake at any rate. So the kid jumps in and they start talking. He seems nice enough and talk about a variety of things, and just after the conversation comes to a lull, does the traffic start moving again, and my dad starts picking up speed. The kid at this point, who had been a complete chatterbox for the last hour and a half, suddenly starts going all quiet. My dad isn't too fussed, and because of the lull in conversation, puts the radio back on and just listens to it while they drive. After about 45 minutes of silence, the kid speaks up, saying he really needs to use the toilet. My dad knows for a fact that there aren't any truck stops in the near future for at least another half hour and asks the kid if he can wait. The kid is pretty insistent that if he doesn't go now, he'll probably end up doing it in the truck, which my dad is very much against. So he finds the nearest shoulder and pulls off and lets the kid go out into the middle of nowhere to do his business. The kid had been gone at this point for well over 5 minutes, and my dad's starting to get a bit irritated. It's pitch black in the middle of the night, the only lights being that of the truck and the occasional passing vehicle, and the kid has just gone. He starts to worry and wonders if the kid has maybe fallen or something. So he decides to give it a few more minutes before he grabs his flashlight and goes out to investigate. He climbs down from his truck and just feels that something is off. He can't quite put his finger on it. So before he goes out, he goes back in, reaches for his handgun, and slides it into the back of his belt. He walks around slowly and quietly, hoping he'll just hear the kid saying he's done or whatever, or see his footsteps towards the truck. But no such thing. It's getting really weird at this point. My dad's feeling super uncomfortable, and half thinking that maybe he should just leave the kid and hope he can hitchhike with someone else. But he really doesn't want to be that guy, knowing he would leave this kid stranded at night in the middle of nowhere. He looks around the grass and can't see him. He puts his flashlight towards the tree line and can't really see him either, although the foliage is extensive, and he definitely isn't anywhere near the hard shoulder. He wonders if he should go out into the forest to look for him, when suddenly he hears running footsteps from behind him, and someone smash into him and poke a metal blade into the back of his neck. It's the kid. His voice no longer sweet, innocent, and needy. Now it was cold and malicious. "Open the trailer, dude, or I'm gonna have to kill you here and now." My dad was completely taken by surprise and tells the kid calmly that he's gonna go get the key as it's locked. The kid has his knife to his side and tells him to walk slowly. My dad obviously has to climb into the truck, and just as he's getting up, he says he's looking for the key, with the kid waiting at the bottom. He looks around frantically when he sees a magnet that he had picked up ages ago. He throws it to the ground outside and it makes a metal clatter. The kid instinctively looks down, and in that one moment does he slam the door shut and drive away, making sure he locks the passenger door right after locking his own. The kid starts screaming and thrusting the knife at the truck, but it's no use. My dad drives off quickly and the kid retreats, abandoned in the middle of nowhere. My dad felt a mix of relief and fear, because he really hoped no one else would pick up the kid, and wondered if he'd get in trouble for leaving someone dangerous on the side of the road. He tried reporting it to the police, but by the time they even went out there, he was long gone, and he never had any follow-up. But he often wonders what happened to the kid who would have killed him out in the middle of nowhere. This happened 3 years ago during COVID time. It was my son's birthday, and we were all in quarantine due to being exposed to someone who had COVID. Because of that, we had to cancel our plans. We decided to take a drive, as we love driving around in the country and hiking, and went to an old church and Masonic lodge that is not in use at all, with its hometown being famous for a big goat statue mounted on top of the steeple. The statue was a gift from someone in Dundee, Scotland, a very old place. No one was around, so my son and I decided to take a look about. We got to ring this huge brass bell by pulling a rope. My boyfriend and other son were far away from us in the empty parking lot. We left, and they were amazed how loud the bell was. We kept driving and exploring until it got dark. My eldest son said he wanted to stop at the graveyard and then go ring the bell one more time. It was his birthday, so I told him he could do as he pleased. We walked to the graveyard, paid respect to the extremely old graves, and even picked up trash, then just sat down on the road and went back to the Masonic Lodge/Goat Church. We pulled it again, and no one was around. The church is right by the busy highway, no sidewalk, steep stairs or anything. My boyfriend and I decided to stay by the van to smoke a cigarette, and I could see the black outlines of my boys walking towards the front of the church. Well, suddenly out of nowhere, there were what looked like 3 more young men/teen boys walking towards my kids and approaching them quickly, as though they knew my kids. Well, of course, my first instinct was to go over there and make sure they weren't up to no good, but I also wondered where the hell they came from. I walked towards them to make sure all was well, and I heard the bell ring. Then suddenly one of the unknown silhouettes charged at my eldest son, and when this happened, my boyfriend ran with his knife, yelling, "Hey!" at the people. He ran around the corner to approach the group, and I was behind him but not as fast. As I approached the steps, my boyfriend and my kids were starting to run to the car. There was no one there but my family, and I asked, "Where are they?" They just screamed at me to run. I repeatedly asked, "Where are the people?" "There are no people, run!" On our way home, we talked about this insane experience the whole time. We all saw 3 people walking up to my kids right next to them. It looked like they had all planned to meet there. They were walking as a group until one started running towards my son with intent. But my boys never saw them. There was no one there. There is no way they couldn't have noticed them, and there was nowhere for them to hide after. It's all very open and there are no hiding spots. The boys also described how when they reached the steps, it felt like a dream. They got nervous and they quickly rang the bell before my boyfriend got to them. The big brass bell is very loud and can be heard far and wide. Both boys rang it. I only heard it once, and I saw 3 people vanish. My boyfriend and youngest son felt nervous and negative and scared the whole way home. My eldest son, the birthday boy, and I were excited and felt no malignancy whatsoever. My eldest and I always have loved things paranormal, but tonight removed that little piece of doubt in the back of my mind, as I never thought something like that would happen to me. We prayed for protection on the way home. You never know, guys. Anything can happen. This happened in the mid-90s. I went on a road trip with my son, and for some stupid reason decided to take a different route home than the one I had taken previously and was familiar with. Turned out the new route was a super desolate road. I specifically chose to drive in the middle of the night so my son would be sleeping and there would be less traffic. It's probably about 3 a.m, and of course my POS car breaks down. By some luck of the draw, I'm almost right in front of an abandoned roadside market and was able to coast into the parking lot. The windows are boarded up on the market, steam is pouring from under my hood, and it was essentially the start to every single dumb chick breaks down in the middle of nowhere and gets hacked to death movie you've ever seen. All of a sudden, I see headlights coming around the bend. I'd been driving this road for a couple of hours and had seen maybe 1 or 2 other vehicles at the time. A truck drives past, slows down, and I see the reverse lights come on in my rearview mirror. Deliverance banjo music starts to play in my head. The truck pulls up, so our vehicles are driver window to driver window, and I see the driver is an older man, and he is just staring at me. He looks like the stereotypical serial killer you visualize, with long, scraggly grey hair, grizzled stubble, and crazy sort of eyes. He motions for me to roll down my window. I'm trying to look anywhere but directly at him, and act like I don't see him and everything's fine and dandy. Oh no, I'm not in any distress. Please, ignore the steam coming from my car. I'm good, thanks. He backs up a little, parks and gets out of his truck, and begins walking towards my car. I'm thinking this is where my son and I end up as news stories about bodies being found in the boonies when the snow melts. And he starts yelling, "Not gonna hurt ya. Roll down your window." I keep looking anywhere but at him, trying to give off a strong, "I don't want you to mess with me" kind of vibes. In reality, I'm crapping in my pants. He gives me a disgusted look, walks to his truck and starts digging around, and comes back with tools in hand. Now I'm thinking, oh my god, he's got tools. He's gonna bust my teeth out and cut my fingers off so I can't be identified. He yells to open the hood. I'm looking everywhere but at him. He yells it again. He wants to know what's wrong. I'm so scared, but I reach down and pop the hood open. He opens it, and I crouch down so that I can see him through the couple of inches where the hood is open. He looks up, and we make eye contact, and I about die. And he keeps doing whatever he's doing down there. He goes back and forth between his truck and my car a few more times, bringing more tools, a jug of something, and something else that I can't make out. After about 15 minutes, he closes my hood and yells at me to start it up. The car splutters a little, turns over, and then seems fine. He yells, "Be careful, a lot of weirdos out here," gets in his truck, gives me one last disgusted look and drives off. My car made it home. My dad looked it over, after I told him the story, and deducted that the guy had changed the radiator hose. My dad pointed out many times that the chances of me being struck by lightning were probably better than my chances of some random guy in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the night, happened to be driving around with a radiator hose and the tools to replace it for whatever 10-plus-year-old POS foreign car I was driving. This was around 12 years ago. My husband's family has a mountain house across the state. Once we get off the turnpike, we take a single country road up over a mountain and down the other side of our house. It's about a half-hour ride on this winding mountain road. In the middle section near the top of the mountain, it is the most winding part, and the word slow is written across the road in giant letters. We take this road maybe 6 to 10 times a year and back. I'd been up the house dozens of times at this point, and nothing odd happened in the trip, up until this one time. My husband was driving. I'm in the passenger seat, and there were no other people in the car. There's a Billy Joel song playing in the iPod through the car speakers. I think it was Uptown Girl. There is no radio reception anywhere near this remote mountain, and as we approach the area where slow is written across the road, a man's voice, not Billy Joel's, comes through the car speaker and says in this deep, creepy-ass voice, "Slow down." The words were not in that song. My husband and I look at each other like, oh my god, did you hear that? We have no idea where it came from, since there are no houses or anything on this side of the mountain, and we didn't pass any other cars on the way down. But we do laugh about it, and bring it up every once in a while when we go up the mountain and see the words slow on the pavement. It's never happened again in the hundreds of trips we've made since that night. I stopped at a co-worker's house one night after a late shift to drop off something she had forgotten. I didn't know exactly where I was, but I was familiar with the town and knew the highway I had to take home was very close, so I turned on the GPS to get me back to the highway. Sometime after 3 a.m, the GPS bugged out and started leading me in circles before finally spitting me out on some back-wooded road in the middle of nowhere. I drove around a bit until I saw a man just walking in circles next to the road. I'm a young woman with a small stature, and I've seen enough movies to urge me to keep driving, but I kept watching him in my rear view. When I looked back to the road, I had to slam on the brakes because in front of me was an albino deer just standing there. It looked up, then walked away, and I kept driving. I saw lights behind me, but at this point I was looking out for more deer or weird things and ignored them as they kept getting brighter and brighter. This guy's getting really close, I thought. So I looked up and there was nothing there, no cars in sight. This happened 2 more times and I still didn't know where I was, and I was about to call my boyfriend when I made a turn and came out right in the town I lived. When I got home, my boyfriend told me he heard the sound of our front door opening and someone coming inside twice while I was gone, but he checked the house and didn't find anyone. It was an odd night, and I don't think either of us have slept well. I've been to this girl's house twice after this incident, and both times my GPS has taken me right to the highway like normal. I wish I knew what it was about. I spent the last 10 years as a truck driver, so I've had many stories to share, but I'll share the strangest. Coming out of Washington State Terminal, I was asked to take one of our drivers to Southern California. Not a big deal, I've done it before, but let's meet our friend Gibson. You see, Gibson here seemed very normal and cheerful and a delightful person to keep company with while talking your ear off. However, this all changes once the sun went down. Gibson here turns to me and says, "Hey, can you pull over for a sec? I need to ward off the snake people." This is where my brain doesn't quite process this, and I say, "What?" He repeats the same line, and here is where my spidey senses tell me that if Gibson doesn't ward off his snake people, I'm gonna have a bigger problem than this guy's cookies getting flipped. So I pull over and he gets out. Now, here comes the weird. He does the dance in front of my headlights, and all I can say is he certainly does his snake warding dance. Now, here's my dilemma. This guy's obviously a few fries short of a Happy Meal, but I was asked to drive his ass to Southern California. Unfortunately, I think too long about this, and Gibson is sitting again next to me in the passenger seat, as nothing has happened. I drive 1,200 miles without stopping, and Gibson gets to his new truck in Southern California, and I never give another person I don't know a lift. Ever. 2 years ago, when my autistic daughter had trouble sleeping at night, she was 1.5 at the time, I would place her in the car seat and drive her around. It was the only way she'd fall asleep soundly, and I lived with my parents in a nice neighborhood. So one night I'm driving, and my girl had finally fallen asleep. It's 9 p.m. at this point, so I'm hungry and want to let her fall into a deeper sleep so that I can move her. I get some food from a drive-thru and pull over on a side street right next to the restaurant so that I can eat. I'm finishing eating and look back to check on my kid, and suddenly, these super bright headlights pull up behind me a little too close. I wave apologetically, assuming whoever it is trying to park at the house I'm currently in front of. So I pull away and start going down the street, and once I'm at the end of a few blocks and around the corner, I see the headlights again. No biggie, this is a semi-busy side street, so people cut down this way all the time. Only this person is riding my ass like I'm not moving fast enough, and I get annoyed and change lanes to get out of their way. Almost as soon as I do, they follow. At this point I realize that the car is the same sedan that had pulled up behind me on the last street. But now they are too close for me to see the make of the car, and the high beams are on, so I can't see anything behind me. I curse myself for not paying better attention to the car before. I didn't want to be crazy paranoid, so I took a few unnecessary side streets and passed my neighborhood, only for this person to be behind me turn for turn and lane change for lane change. So I panicked and called my dad. I know I should have called the police, but I was 21 and did the first thing I could think of. He was at work half an hour away. He has terrible reception and decides to call me back on the landline at his work, and is on his cell phone with the sheriff's department for our neighborhood, and they tell me to drive to the station. It's been close to 40 minutes since the person had started following me and kept riding me closer and closer. I'm running lights and swerving around at this point trying to catch someone's attention. So I drive to the station, and no one is there. Not a car, not a cruiser, no one in the department office, not even any cars in the small parking lot, and they want me to pull into the lot and wait for an officer. I'm alone, and my 1-year-old is now fussing in the back seat, and there is only one way in and out of the parking lot. I note past the station and tell my dad to tell the officer that there's no one there. I see a sheriff's car at the light ahead and start to honk and flash my lights as he drives across the intersection. I am driving too. He either misses what I'm doing or ignores it. It's now been a little over an hour, and the person has tapped my arse 4 times. Eventually, I saw another sheriff's car and just laid on my horn, and I think he caught on because he busted a U-turn and came back towards us. As he did, the car behind me disappeared into the mall across the street and the officer followed. I was instructed to go back to the station and did so, and eventually, I was waiting for so long, I went inside, triple locking the door of my car because I was terrified. The office had no one except an emergency phone on the desk, and that one only connected me to another extension. To wrap the story up, they made me feel crazy and said they never found the car, and that all they could do was make a statement since technically nothing happened. And he offered to follow me and my daughter home, only to drive away as soon as I parked, while I was left to take my sleeping kid inside, shaking so hard I couldn't unlock the door. I ran upstairs to my mum's room. She was on pain medication after a surgical procedure, so she was asleep. And I shake her awake, sobbing, and tell her what happened. It took me 2 days to sleep again at night, and to this day I refuse to do night drives with my daughter. This happened in the summer, around 2016. My twin sister and I grew up in a small, sleepy village in northeast Nebraska called Bow Valley. The population is less than 200 people, and there was only one store open at any given time. We moved back home after college for a little while until we could figure out a plan for our futures. One night at around 2 or 3 in the morning, we were both still awake and having a high amount of anxiety. This was nothing new, as we've had anxiety since we were young. We decided to go for a walk, to try to relieve that constant ache in our chests. Because Bow Valley was so small, everyone knew everyone, and it was a relatively safe place. We had gone for walks at this time before without any incident. We would walk along the main road, which is about a half mile, and connect to the highway. The route is only partially lit by streetlights on each end, the lights of the town, and one singular light at the end of the road, by the highway. My sister and I talked while we walked. We would speak about whatever was in our minds, usually what was bothering us at that moment, and that's what we did. Because of the conversation, the first half of the walk went by really fast. We left the streetlights of the village behind as we walked that half mile to the highway. We were feeling so good at that point from the exercise that we contemplated going even further onto a minimum maintenance road that was on the opposite side of the highway. "You want to keep going?" I asked my sister. "Sure," she replied. We began walking across towards the road. There were no lights on this road, and admittedly, I am a bit scared of the dark. All the same, I was determined to keep going. But as we proceeded, that really good feeling started to go away and was slowly replaced by the feeling of being watched. I found myself looking around into the fields, and dread filled my body. I don't want to go any further. I don't like the way this feels," I said. My sister did not argue. I don't know if it was because she was feeling it too, or because we often respected each other's intuition. Either way, I was happy to turn around and get out of there. We walked back across the highway and onto the main road back into Bow Valley. The streetlight was making me feel safer somehow, and I tried to shrug off that feeling. Then, as we neared closer to the town, we saw something out of the ordinary. we noticed a tall silhouette of a stranger walking on the opposite side of the road towards us. I thought perhaps my eyes were playing tricks on me. I thought maybe it was the streetlights lined up in a particular way. Neither of us had bought a phone or flashlight. "Did you see that?" my sister asked. "Yeah." I felt my heart drop. "Maybe it's a neighbor. It's weird for someone to be out this late, though." "It's weird for us to be out this late," she replied. Well, she had me there. Trying to identify the approaching figure, we concentrated our gaze. The longer we observed, the more things seemed off. The figure was walking away from town, so the streetlights behind it framed its silhouette and movement. The first thing we noticed is that the figure was wearing a coat, which was odd because it was the middle of summer. That's when we began to realize the body language was unorthodox. The motion of the stranger mimicked walking, but not like how you or I do it. It was almost comparable to the movement of arms and legs of a marionette doll. Even more unnerving, the spindly tall figure was walking swiftly and with purpose. My sister and I both felt uneasy. I had a lighter in my pocket that I placed in my fist, preparing myself in case I needed to punch whatever this thing was. My sister had a pocket knife that she got out and was ready. As we were contemplating our next move, I noticed a car driving on the highway. I sensed it was going to turn our way. "Let's wait and see if that car comes this way," I said. "The light will illuminate whoever that is." Meanwhile, we have slowed to a stop, but the thing was still moving closer and closer. It would only be a short matter of time before it reached us, and luckily for us it did. The car did end up turning onto our road, and so we stayed back and watched what happened. The car neared us, and the lights finally hit the figure. At that moment our blood ran cold, as we both watched this thing fly into the nearby darkness of the field the second the headlights were near. It flew so fast, it was like a tissue tied to a string being yanked in the opposite direction. I remember the silhouette tails of the coat flapping behind it. I remember that the light did not illuminate any part of it, and it remained a dark mass. We looked at each other absolutely horrified, and booked it back to the streetlights of the village and back to the house. I couldn't help but feel that we would have been in danger had it not been for that car. That was the only car we saw that night. And I wondered if the car was the doing of our ancestors, or maybe just a coincidence, or perhaps we were being protected. Either way, this experience has opened our minds, and we have not walked that stretch of road at night again. I was deep in Texas, coming out of Laredo. A Mexican truck starts coming up alongside me. You can spot them easy enough when you know what you're looking for. He gets up next to me, and no one is at the wheel. And then I notice 2 straps are on the wheel, and what I can only assume is the dude was attempting to drive the sleeper with a set of reins. I backed way off, and let them get much further ahead of me. I didn't want to die because of this moron. I saw them, 3 of them, in one truck. Later, at the border check on 35, they were in cuffs. I was not surprised. Idiots could have killed lots of people. On another occasion, I was running on Kansas Highway 96, out of Great Bend early one morning. Dawn was just peeking over the horizon back to the east. I rounded the curve out of town, heading west, when I see Bambi and the gang crossing the road. Must have been at least 12 of them. I get up in the middle of the road and lay on the air horn. They stop crossing, but they all start running along both sides of the road in the direction I'm going. I get back on the throttle, and just as I come onto the group, I see 2 of the deer on the north side decide that at that very moment they want to join the group on the south. Reflexes kick in, and I jumped into the oncoming lane to avoid them. I saw one's face clear as day as my fender and door went past him. He didn't hit the front corner of my trailer or my drives, luckily. However, he did hit his head on the side of my trailer. It must have been enough to daze him, as I watched him fall and get hit by my back hopper on the side. He went under my trailer tandems where he exploded. I was over gross weight, and he didn't stand a chance. I pulled over about a mile up the road where it was wide enough to do so, as it was a 2-lane, and went to look over my trailer. I didn't see any marks on my trailer or hopper, nor anything much on the trail tandems. The only things that were left were a tuft or two of fur and bits of blood on the mud flaps. Rest in peace, Bambi. I was 19, driving home from work late at night from a bar and grill. My drive home was about 14 miles and roughly half an hour. I noticed a blue car immediately after leaving. As it was late, maybe midnight to 1 a.m., with only cars around. It was not police, and no one I recognized. A bearded average man. This car followed me all the way home, down the main roads, and I turned into my sub, and so did they. I was keen to this, and started driving in loops as to not lead them to my house. They followed me down every side street. They were very clearly going well out of their way to follow me in the middle of the night. This is when I went into fight or flight. If I got pulled over, I would explain to the officer what was happening, and be happy to go to the station where it was safe. We were the only cars on the road. Then after a few shakes, I lost them. Or so I thought. I made sure to speed enough on a few turns with my lights off so they couldn't see where I turned, and sat for a minute with all my lights off and phone down to pitch black. I looked in the rearview mirror. Nothing. Then after a minute I saw them turn on my road. I left my headlights off and absolutely drove lawlessly to escape them. No headlights, stop signs, or speed limits in an urban area. It was honestly insane. Luckily I drove to a friend's house and he had a small party going on, so I knew I was safe. I'm never going to know who it was or why they did it, or what would have happened if I'd had led them home. Thank God I'm a great driver, and watched enough spy movies to probably save my life that night. This was when I was 18. I'm 27 now, so it was quite a while ago, when I was still in college. One day, a group of friends and I decided we were going to check out a road in Metamora, Michigan, that was supposedly haunted. I have always been fascinated by the paranormal, and was obviously super down to go. My friend Emily, on the other hand, was not so keen. While she enjoyed some things that were spooky, she wasn't particularly excited about the idea, since the road does have a bit of a dark history behind it. For a bit of context, in the small town of Metamora, Michigan, lies a 2-mile dirt path, aptly named Blood Road. The legend of how the road got its ever so appropriate nickname is because of the legend that a man had taken the life of his wife and dumped her body in the swamps along the path. It is said that the dirt of the road or mortars of the swamp are known to turn red because of the murder. Another legend states that back in the 1600s, there were cultists who practiced Satanism and witchcraft, and they fled into the swampy area due to the abundance of witch hunts and trials that went on during that time. It is said that they were able to practice their rituals and sacrifices here, and spilled blood that stains the dirt road to this day. For a more scientific approach on why the dirt is colored that way, it's because of the red clay mixed in with the dirt. In more recent times, there have been sightings of people performing questionable seances and rituals in the swamps, and even alleged meetings of KKK members. But back to the story. My other friends, Claire and Harriet, were just as interested in going to see Blood Road as I. With a little bit of peer pressure and a promise not to leave the vehicle, Emily finally gave in and decided why not. Of course, if you're going to go to an alleged haunted road, you have to go at night, and that is exactly what we did. We all met up at Claire's house and decided to carpool to Emily's house since she lived on a dirt road anyway and was used to driving down them. Making the 20 to 30 minute trek to Blood Road was pleasant. Harriet and I joked about each seeing something and maybe even catching it on our cell phones, while Claire was talking to Emily about other things, but she was still visibly uneasy. The entire car went quiet as soon as we reached our destination, and the sun had gone down significantly. No more jokes were to be had, nor idle chatter, as I pulled into the 2-mile stretch of muddy road. In the daytime, it isn't as intimidating, since the greenery of the plants and trees lessen the creepiness. However, we were nearing almost total darkness, with only the car's headlights as the source of light. Emily slows to a stop and makes sure we remember our promise to stay in the car. She lowers the windows, and for the first minute or so, all we hear is the typical swamp life. It got eerily quiet all of a sudden, and everyone in the car was hyper-aware of a strange muffled speech in the distance. The 4 of us peered out the window to hear a little better, and as soon as we did that, we recognized the sound to be chanting. None of us could tell exactly what was being chanted, but it did not sound like anything any of us could understand. Emily decided she'd had enough and rolled the window up, and honestly, I couldn't blame her, as we were all unnerved. Nothing really happened to us, except for the fact that we were all spooked by the chanting that we had heard. The drive back was quiet, and none of us wanted to speak as the darkness of the night sky and looming trees swallowed everything while still on Blood Road. I guess Harriet and I got what we wanted, but I'd like to go back again to see what else can be discovered. My friend Jane also had a story to share on Blood Road. Back when Jane was in high school, she and her 2 older sisters and a friend of hers heard about an abandoned house on Blood Road and wished to go explore it. Like myself, Jane is also heavily interested in the paranormal. However, she is a little sensitive to sensing spirits and the like. On a mild winter's night, Jane and her sisters and friend drove down Blood Road and parked on the side near the tree line of the woods. There was nothing spectacular or disturbing about the abandoned houses that they had heard about. It was just old and spooky. They trekked about 10 minutes into the forest before reaching their decrepit destination. The closer they got to the house, the more uneasy Jane became. Eventually it got so bad that she refused to go into the house altogether, as something was telling her not to go in. Jane's sisters and friend still wanted to explore the area, but agreed to take her back to the car as she was clearly disturbed. On the way back to the car, the group came across a small clearing, and as Jane looked up from the ground, she saw a black, humanoid figure around 6 foot tall walking among the trees and vanishing. She was frozen in terror, and a strong sense of dread washed over her. For at least a minute, Jane could neither speak nor move, as she was frightened by what she had seen, and she recalls her sister telling her when she went to grab her by the hand. It was ice cold, and that her face had drained of all color as she stopped walking. Jane's sisters and friends had to force her to move, as she was too scared to do so, but eventually got back to the car. As soon as Jane was in the car, the sense of fear gradually went away, as she wasn't in the vicinity of the house. Her sisters and friend went back to the house to continue to explore. There was the typical graffiti on the walls, some of it occult in nature, and there was evidence of a possible ritual with burnt candles and a few old books. However, they only explored one room due to the sudden feeling of unease and nausea that overcame them the longer they stayed. Fortunately, nothing happened to the 3 that went back to explore, and they had to call it quits once the nausea and unwelcome feelings became too much. It's been years since this has happened, and nothing ever came of it. But like myself, Jane is willing to go back and see what else can be found on Blood Road. For the last 7 years, I've been a bull hauler, and I've seen some messed up stuff having to do with cattle. But the scariest thing that's ever happened to me was on a trip to East Texas. I had left out from around Austin and went up just north of Amarillo to kick them off at a feedlot, around a 600-mile trip. I was feeling pretty good, so I decided to turn around and come on back to the cattle company instead of taking my break. I called dispatch and he gave me a sale barn to go pick up and bring back to the company. When I got back, I was pretty worn out, but they told me that a truck had broken down heading to Texarkana and that he needed me to go and get the cattle. I thought, sure, I can do this. I made it about an hour from Texarkana on a little 2-lane Texas back road, talking to a friend of mine on the phone and trying to stay awake. When I fell asleep, I remember hearing my friend yelling my name and waking up to find myself in the grass with a cowboy on a horse right in front of me roping a calf. He roped, dallied off, and turned to face me. Just as I hit him, he disappeared. It was a hallucination. It scared me so bad I was wide awake for the rest of the trip. I used to think being outlaw made me a badass. I'd run 1,500 to 2,000 miles with no sleep and just call it another day at work. I realize now it was me being stupid and putting myself and innocent people in mortal peril. This summer, my 17-year-old daughter was working a late night shift. It was a little after midnight when I left to pick her up, so when I stepped outside it was eerily silent. You couldn't hear the frogs, insects, nothing. I stood there just waiting to hear them again, but I had this awful feeling something was watching me. I got in the car and just shook off the weird feelings and turned the radio up loud to distract myself. So I started driving down the road with my brights on, as there are many deers in the area, and make a right-hand turn once onto another road. Making the turn, my headlights caught a glimpse of something. It was black, quick, and jumped from the roadway onto the side of a steep hill on the opposite side. I was scared at this moment. I was afraid to drive past this area. For the remaining drive, I kept trying to rationalize what I had just seen. Was it a deer? Some animal? Maybe an alien? The possibilities were endless, but I had never seen anything like it. When we made it home, the nightlife noises were back and thriving. There was no eerie feeling that something was lurking nearby. A few weeks had passed and I had spoken with a neighbor that lives 10 minutes away, as we live way out in the country. And she said some weird things had been happening around there. I thought maybe she meant a thief or coyotes were around. Then she said, "You might think I'm crazy, but," and goes on to tell me how silent it would get at night more often, and there were some dark figures that they had seen. Not just her, but also a few other people that lived nearby. So I tell her of my ordeal of the night that I had experienced, and told her it was hard to explain exactly what I had seen, because I'd never seen anything else like it. She asked me, did it look like a Dementor from Harry Potter? Oh my God, yes. She tells me her sister-in-law was out visiting and left after it was dark to go home. Driving close to the area where my house is located, my neighbor gets a call from her sister-in-law that's screaming and crying hysterically. They drove to where she was, and she was too scared to even open the car door. Eventually, she was able to tell us that she'd seen something black crouching over in the roadway. She slows down and is being cautious, but this dark figure stands up and jumps to the nearest tree and climbs it so fast and disappears. She was shaken up. They had to drive her home. It never happened again, and I haven't heard any other stories from my other neighbors. I will forever be cautious when it goes silent on a hot summer's night. Who can I even share this with, other than a few close neighbors who had also seen this mysterious, dark figure? If I told anyone, then they'd think I were crazy. Winters are usually silent here, and I hope whatever this thing was, moved on, or is at least hibernating all winter. 4 years ago, after just getting my degree, I decided it was time to leave my hometown and pursue my career. So I moved to a big city that was 9 hours away from my parents and most of my family. I had no friends there for months, and my starting salary was low because I came into this company as a trainee. I was very demotivated and missed my family a lot. At one point, I decided to go visit the relatives who lived by the coast, which was a 5-hour drive away by car. I didn't have a car, and the buses were expensive. But my cousin told me about this Facebook group for rides between my city and another that was close to their town. I went there and found myself a ride with some university students who were just a few years younger than I was. And the day for the trip came. I met them, and in total it was 5 of us in a wide sedan. A lady who was studying medicine, the owner of the car, her boyfriend, the driver, a sophomore girl who was friends with them, and a random young guy who found their ad on Facebook called Mark. It was a Friday, and people from this whole region were infamous for drinking extremely often. So, inspired by the warning my cousin gave me, I awkwardly asked them, "Sorry to ask, but none of you have drunk recently or plan to on our trip, right?" The driver assured me that he was fully sober and that he wouldn't have any, even if the passengers did. After hearing that, his girlfriend and the other girl assured that they wouldn't be drinking because their parents were very strict and would not let them misbehave. Mark giggled when hearing that and whispered to me, "Women in their town are infamous for drinking a lot more and denying it." The trip went on, and we went around dozens of mountains. We had a few conversations about university and work, but most of the trip was listening to a popular singer from the 90s. After around 2 hours and a half, the driver stopped the car at a gas station, and he needed the toilet. Mark decided to go with him, as he wanted to get something from the store. A few minutes later, I see Mark and our driver coming back to the car, each holding a 6-pack of cerveza. Well, actually, the driver was carrying 2 of those. I almost freaked out, but kept my composure and asked them if they were going to drink now. The driver said, "I won't until I'm done driving, but let the others and yourself take 1 or 2 if they want." Almost 2 hours later, we had left the mountains and arrived to flat land. The sign said that we were 1 kilometer away from the city. Suddenly, the car took a right turn, leaving the main road and heading towards the suburbs. The place looked desolated, and most of the houses seemed empty. I thought it was a bit weird, but didn't ask anything because I assumed that maybe we were dropping the other girl off, as they probably already knew where she lived. The dude then just parked the car on the yard of an abandoned house and said, "We're basically home. You guys down for some drinks?" Mark was totally down for it, but the girls kept saying stuff like, "I'm not sure, I don't usually drink." "Oh, okay, we'll make an exception, only because it was a tough midterm." I refused and said, "But how are we going to get to the city? You guys agreed to take me to the bus station." They all said it was very close, and that worst case scenario I could just walk there. I was more worried because I planned to take the local bus at a certain hour to then get to my cousin's house, which was still an hour from there. They started drinking really fast, and the girls got to a point where they were trying to pee doing a handstand against the wall. I was desperate to leave, but I didn't feel safe walking to the city because it was really dark out there, and this region had a bad reputation for crime. Outsiders were specifically more at risk. There was no phone service either, so I had to wait for these guys and see what they could offer me. They finally decided it was time to go home. I said if it wasn't okay for any of them to drive, because they were all plastered, I offered to do it for them. However, the driver said, "It's not up to me. Car belongs to my girlfriend." However, his girlfriend refused, saying she didn't even know me, and her dad wouldn't be okay with a stranger driving her car. I said I understood that, but they had to honor the arrangement. After a bit, the driver finally got off from the driver's seat. I assumed they would let me drive, as I was sitting in the middle of the back seat, so I asked the guys next to me to let me off the car. The sophomore girl, who was to my left, did, but before I could stop her, she climbed into the driver's seat. The girl started saying, "Come on, Abby, let me drive. It's close and there's no one outside no more." "Alright, sure, but go slow." The previous driver got into the back seat with me, and I was still confined to the middle seat. I was getting upset, and I wanted to stop her, but I didn't know how, because everyone seemed okay with this. My panic worsened when the sophomore girl started asking how to turn the car on and operate it. "You don't know how to drive?" I asked. "Nah, I don't. My parents haven't let me drive. It's my first time." "Get down then, please. I have a license. I can get you home safely." Then the car's owner told me I couldn't decide over her car and said that it would be okay, that there was almost no one out driving at this hour, and that they could help her friend learn to drive. I asked them to let me get out the car, but they wouldn't let me. They swore it was a very short drive and that we would go slowly and all be okay. The girl really had no idea how to drive. Unfortunately, this was an automatic transition. Had it been a manual one, she probably wouldn't been able to even move it. And the car moved, but in the ways you would expect it to move for a driver who had never stepped on pedals of an actual car. She would hit the brake and steer the wheel too hard, drove into the middle of the road and kept freaking out while the others yelled instructions to her, while I pleaded with them to let me out of this moving death trap. Fortunately, the streets were empty, but I couldn't help fear that if a car came, we would surely crash into it, as there was no way she would be able to manage moving the car out of the way in time. But eventually, we made it to the street where the bus station was, and as soon as they pointed that out, I asked them to just stop the car and let me walk there, but they didn't. They forced me to be dropped off at the front. If I were in this situation again, I don't even know how I would get out of it. And I have never taken another ride in that way since. Be careful who's driving you. My sister worked about an hour and a half from my mum's, where she was temporarily staying. Which was bad, because she had a bad habit of falling asleep in cars. So one night that she worked really late, I made her promise to call me, and I'd stay up and talk to her until she got home. One night, late, I'm on the phone with her, and out of nowhere she starts screaming. She finally gets out some semblance of a sentence, telling me there was a girl covered in blood, crawling out of the ditch onto the road. She pulls the car back around and jumps out of the car and runs to her, the phone falling out onto the ground, and I'm still listening. I hear the girl start sobbing and telling her, "Oh God, no, not you, not you, I need help, they're coming back for me." My sister at this point thinks the girl must have some mental issues because of how frantic and disconnected her thoughts are, and because of what she keeps saying, that she needs help, but that she doesn't think my sister could help. In hindsight though, perhaps the girl saw my 5'9", 100-pound sister with her high-pitched voice and thought that whoever it is could easily kill her too. From here, besides the screaming and broken glass, I can only tell it from her side. That's when she sees this truck pulling up and is about to wave them down when the girl goes crazy and starts crawling and pleading with my sister to run. The truck puts on its lights, and two very large men jump out and start walking towards them, making clicking, catcalling sounds. And that's when my sister's blood turns to ice. She reaches over, grabs the girl as there's no way in hell she's leaving her, and in a whirlwind manages to force her into the car and jumps in herself before the men reach the car and start smashing her lights. She speeds off, clipping one of them, and is followed by the truck trying to run her off the road for about a half hour. They only pull away when she reaches a hospital. Inside, the girl was in a panic and wouldn't let my sister leave her with the doctors. She keeps saying that she was her best friend. From the doctors, my sister learnt that the girl was repeatedly raped and tied up and dragged behind the truck. To add to the creepiness, once my sister got home, she looked at her name tag and remembered that she had left hers at home and borrowed an ex-employee's tag, Stephanie. And yet, despite my sister saying she didn't recall ever not fearing for her life enough to get formalities and exchange names, the girl had called her by her real name. My sister never testified, not because she refused, but because she was never approached or asked to do so. She did give the cops her clothes, and they did process her car. Turns out the police knew who it was. Once she was in protective custody, it came out the girl had dated one of them at some point. It had something to do with drugs. And then thinking she had told someone or something along those lines. Another crazy thing? My sister saw her working not too far from where it happened a few years later. I would assume that my sister would have to testify if they had caught them, but if they hadn't, then I can't explain why she felt safe living in the area we did. I am chronically ill, and one morning had a doctor's appointment. It's a regular thing for me. When I was making my way home, I had taken the exit off the highway that I needed. As I turned left, I noticed that there were flashing lights and a siren behind me. The road was only one lane for a short time, but then a left turn lane opened at a stoplight. That was when I needed to go, so I pulled over there and stopped behind an SUV. The fire truck goes around, taking a left, so going in the direction that I also needed to go. After they pass, we turn and start heading down that road. However, the SUV in front of me was only going at 15 miles an hour for some reason, and I slowed down. There was no passing lane, just a middle of the road turn lane. I couldn't go around him. When we come up on a road, they are all braking suddenly and pull over towards that road, but blocking it as if they were perpendicular to it. I thought this was weird, but maybe it was someone who got lost and didn't know where they were going. As I passed them, they honked their horn at me. I'm not sure why. I wasn't being aggressive or anything. I think nothing of it beyond, that's weird, and I carry on driving. They pull out immediately after I pass and start flashing their brights at me. Again, quite weird, but okay. Then something happens that made me alert and nervous. He starts charging my car from behind, pulls back away, then slams on the gas and almost hits my car, then beeps and flashes his brights. Rinse and repeat. I was feeling unsafe at this point, so I tapped my brakes. Nope, just caused him to honk more. He charged my car 4 times. A while up the road there was a roundabout and I had to go left. Turns out he was going left too. However, the road then had only 2 lanes instead of 1, and I stayed in the left lane as our apartment complex was just half a mile up the road. I was behind a semi who was going slower, but I was fine with that, hoping the guy behind me would just pass and let me go. He got over into the right lane, so I thought he would just leave me alone. But then he saw I had my blinker on, so he immediately hit the brakes and pulled behind me, and turned his blinker to follow me. By this time I'm really scared. I knew that if I pulled in he would prevent me from leaving by blocking the entrance, so I sure as hell didn't want him finding out where I lived. I turned my blinker off and went straight instead. A while up the road, he pulled beside my car, honking and screaming at me. I was frozen in fear, so I just stared straight ahead, not looking at him, and after a minute that felt like an hour, he gunned it and raced ahead of me in the truck. I was able to reach the road and turn around to go home. Even after arriving home though, I was scared that he would find out where I lived and do something to my fiance's car, which at that point I was driving. Luckily, that did not happen and I was safe. Ever since then, I've been hyper alert to people who are behind me, paranoid that someone else is going to follow me. Yes, I know the chances logically of that are slim, but anxiety doesn't listen to logic. So, to the crazy road-raging driver, let's not meet again. I was returning from a visit with family. I took a Greyhound bus from the airport to Humboldt County. I typically would have flown in to San Francisco, but for some reason I must have flown into Sacramento or LAX, and I don't remember why, being that it was many years ago. I just remember being on that bus for many hours. It was fairly full, and there was a man on the bus who was very friendly, and we chatted most of the way. He was a contractor, and was going to be staying in Chico for several weeks on a job. The further north we got, the emptier the bus became. I remember noticing that the bus driver was driving rather erratically for much of the trip north. He was also taking a lot of back roads, which is weird, as he was driving inordinarily fast. I was noticing that with each stop there were fewer and fewer people on the bus, until the only two people remaining were myself and the contractor that I had been chatting to. I became very uncomfortable, and I knew that once we got past the Chico stop, there weren't going to be many stops, and we were going to be into the Redwoods, and I knew that I was going to be the only person that was probably going to be on that bus, because the contractor was getting off in Chico, and I was fairly certain that at that hour of the night we were traveling there would likely be very few people who wanted to go to Humboldt County. I felt very uneasy about this bus driver, and I remember just putting my head in my hands and praying and asking for God to protect me and give me a sign whether I should get off the bus in Chico where the man was getting off and simply get a hotel there and hop on another bus in the morning first thing. And I was really nervous about telling the man that I felt uncomfortable, as I didn't know him, and I didn't want to be a burden to him. After a little while, the man turned to me and asked if I felt uncomfortable. He told me that he felt really weird about me being on the bus by myself. I knew at that moment this was the Lord's way of keeping me safe. The man offered to pay for my hotel room, and I accepted his offer. He did pay for my room, and was just the nicest man ever. He didn't try to come to my room or anything like that. He even paid for the brunch they had at the hotel in the morning. It was very nice. I just was reminded of that story and wanted to share it, and I'm thankful I didn't take that bus, because I honestly don't know what would have happened to me if I would have. This is my dad's story. He was a truck driver, or lorry driver as we call them here in England. He used to work down the ports of Dover where we lived. His job would be to pick up one of the lorries as it was arriving from France. He would then drive it all the way to wherever it needed to go. He came back home from work one day, really disgruntled, and refused to tell my mum and I what was going wrong. After a while, and a drink or two, he confessed to the following story. He told us that he was driving his usual load. This, for him, meant leaving the house at about 4 a.m. to pick up this delivery. He was driving out, and just as he arrived at one of his usual pickup spots, somewhere just a bit north of London, he had to wait while they emptied out the cargo. I think it was for a supermarket. He told us he'd been here many times before, and that there was a little area for truck drivers to rest at. He stopped talking to the workers and made his way over to have a little bit of a sit down and use the toilet. When he was in the toilet, he heard someone walk in, but when he looked around, as it was still very early in the morning and he wasn't expecting to see anyone, he was surprised to be met with no one. That was odd, he thought. Could it be a female lorry driver who had gone into the ladies and the echo had just carried or something? He tried to put it out of his mind and finished going to the loo, washed his hands and walked out. He sat in the waiting area for a while, reading the morning paper. They always took a while, and it gave him a breather before his next load. Right as he was reading, he heard footsteps coming out of the toilet. He didn't want to look over, feeling it would be nosy, but knowing that they would have to come through this way and would either sit in the lounge area or go through the front door, he waited to see who it was who appeared. But there was no one. At this point, he started to feel the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. And so he shouted out into the emptiness, "Is anyone here?" It was met with silence. So he walked into the men's and pushed open the 2 stall doors. He was met with nothing but grotty toilets. There was nowhere to hide here. It was completely vacant. So he shouted into the ladies. Being the gentleman he was, he didn't really want to risk going in. But when he received no reply, and considering the hour it was, he decided to venture in. He pushed open all 3 stall doors and was met with nothing. It was empty. The first rays of sunlight were just coming in the morning, and he looked around, stricken. He promptly walked out of there and back to where they were unpacking his lorry. He started talking with one of the guys working as a way to distract himself, telling himself he hadn't seen anything. But the terror was written all over his face, and after a little while one of the workers asked what was wrong. He didn't really know what to say. He just said he had a stomachache. But one of the workers caught on quick that there was a bit more that he wasn't saying, and pressed on, saying he looked perfectly fine before he went into the little hut. Then, after a little bit of coaxing, he confessed that he thought he may have heard someone go in, and asked if it was any of them. Then, all of them simultaneously burst out into laughter, and asked if he had heard footsteps. He nodded solemnly, and they confirmed that when they use the restroom in that area while unpacking, that they sometimes do hear phantom footsteps, but find no body making them. That's about it as far as the ghost story goes. He did have to make return visits as part of his job, but you can bet your bottom dollar that he never walked into that rest area again. He always asked to use the employee loo inside, and as he knew most of the folk there quite well, they didn't hold it against him. But when he came home that day, he was definitely shaken up, and it took him a good while and a few drinks before he could even go to sleep. When I was younger, aside from being a printer, I did pickups and deliveries from the shop. This day I went down to the warehouse near the docks to pick up some paper. I'm about ready to pull out when I notice a semi about to pull out too. So I thought I'd let him pull out first, because I didn't want a semi on my arse on a gravel road. I pull out after him seconds later when the trailer unhooks from the truck. Now I got this huge, runaway object hurling itself in my face. Luckily, the wiring that hooks up the lights held, and it snapped back a bit, wobbled, and fell on its side. I got out and helped direct oncoming traffic, and told the driver that I never saw anything like that before. He then said it was nothing, and that it happens once in a while. Does it? I just don't like being behind semis anymore, and always change lanes if I can. Some people think I'm nuts, but I think better safe than squished. I was a long-haul truck driver for a few years, and just spending every day out on the road is pretty crazy. You see a lot through the windshield of trucks. A lot of people naturally assume that truckers are male, and for some reason women will flash you a lot. One thing that I did see that sticks out with me are the amount of deceased you see. There was a bad accident one night in Chicago, and it was late, rainy, and the interstate by Wrigley Field, and I could see the flashing lights in the opposite lane. I don't usually rubberneck because I don't want to see other people's misfortune, but this time I did. There was a dead family lying broken on the road, and the first response were pretty much just standing around waiting for the coroner to arrive. I can still see the flashing lights in the rain, and the little, dead child lying 30 feet away from its parents. I wish I'd never looked. Perhaps you wish you'd have never heard it. Another time, near Chicago, probably around Gary, I saw a possible drunk driver in a fancy car driving erratically on the interstate. I called the police and gave them the mile marker so that they could try and stop it. I lost sight of the car as it sped off, but a few miles down the road it was flipped over on the other side of the free lane engulfed in flames. I don't think the driver made it out. There was no one standing beside it. One night in northern Ontario, I was climbing a hill on a single lane, and I was just cresting the top when I see a minivan coming straight at me in my lane, and a long line of cars that they are passing on the other. I have nowhere to go, and I'm not allowed to leave my lane of traffic, even if it means killing you. So I hit the brakes, even managing to lean forward and grab the trailer spike to use all the brakes, knowing two things. I am about to end someone's life in this minivan, and that I'm about to be covered in 1,000 gallons of horse piss that I was hauling in this trailer. Luckily, the stupid minivan was able to get back in the other lane when the other vehicles started hitting their brakes to avoid the incident that was about to happen. Things like that, I remember. Nearly dying in accidents, nearly killing people as they cut you off, not realizing how long it takes for a truck to stop. There are good days to driving, but the bad ones were the reasons I quit. A few years ago, my brother and I were driving a 15-hour drive overnight across 3 provinces in Canada to meet up with our parents and other family at our grandmother's house. It was summer, and it was rainy and flooding a lot of the roads that year, so we had to go off the main route we would take, Trans-Canada Highway, and take some more rural roads we never usually drove on this trip. In the middle of Saskatchewan, at around 2 to 3 a.m., we were on a road called Lewis Rail Trail. We had noticed and made some comments to each other about there being no one around, and so we were hoping that the roads weren't closed or redirected up ahead again. We both had noticed it seemed like the road was totally deserted, but also it wasn't the main highway, so we thought maybe it was just why there was no one else around as we were going along. We started to notice dead deer on the sides of the road, quite a few, and I remember saying something about hoping not to hit one. Then suddenly, we were on a strip of road for a solid 5 to 10 minutes where both sides of the road were absolutely covered in piles of dead deer, one on top of the other, mangled together, eyes open and shining up in the headlights, clearly dead, the way they were piled and twisted up like backwards necks and feet up in the air and stuff. No one in the middle of the road though. None of them splattered like they'd been hit by vehicles, no blood or gore, just hundreds of intact, dead deer bodies lining and piling on top of each other, on both sides of the road. I remember just staring at them and looking over at the dead piles on the other side of the road on occasion, and one of us saying something about being in between walls of dead deer. It sounded totally messed up, but my brother remembers it too. Feeling like we were in a daze or something, like in hindsight, it should have really freaked us out. But I remember just staring at them and seeing their eyes shining, and I remember thinking something, like it looked like they were all looking back at me, wondering why there were so many, wondering why no one else was around, but really, just not saying anything, and mindlessly driving through it for several minutes. It wasn't until after we were past them that there were other vehicles and semi-trucks passing by us again, that we sort of snapped out of it and said, "That was really messed up." I had been taking pictures of everything that trip. Random clouds, cows in fields, my feet on the dashboard. But I didn't think for a second to take a picture of this bizarre road lined with dead deer on both sides, because I don't think I was thinking straight. Me and my brother spoke about this often. It bothers us now because we both remember how weird it was. But saying it to other people never seems to justify the absurdity. I don't think people believe it happened, but we both witnessed it and felt the same thing. I usually sit in the front of the bus, perhaps because I'm close to the entrance, or perhaps because I feel more secure near the driver. I just hang down my head listening to my headphones, but only ever with one, because I like to hear what's happening around me. This was the first time I saw him. I heard when he started to speak with me, so I put down my headphones and the bus was quite empty. It was just me and one other person who was far in the back. The driver was between 30 and 40. He looked just like a bus driver at that age, a little overweight with blonde hair and a couple of days without shaving. "You gonna work?" "Yeah." This bus was a common line to get to the one large workplace around my area. He asked a few questions, just some small talk, and I didn't mind. Then he started telling me about his ex and her kids. "She called the police on me. I just need to put my lotion on my crotch. The kid was in the bathroom with me, but I need to do it because the doctor told me I need to do it every day." I froze. I didn't see that coming. Then I heard his story about how he was not a child toucher. He just needed to put his ointment on his parts, and it just so happened to be at the same time his girlfriend's kids were around him. And all the details that she was crazy. I honestly didn't know how to respond. I think I told him something about, "Yeah, but if you're innocent, they'll see that." It was the longest bus ride and most uncomfortable one I've ever been on. I just wanted it to end. I thought of calling the bus company, but on the other hand, he was already under investigation by the police, so I never called them. I'll never forget the last line in our conversation. "Do you have kids?" I told him I did not. I'm a long-haul truck driver, so I'm no stranger to the States, and I've seen things that I can't explain. But this is by far the weirdest thing that's ever happened to me. I was driving through Arizona heading westbound on I-40. I'd finally hit Flagstaff and get out at a truck stop and handled my business. As I left Flagstaff, I ran by mile marker 185. It's about 10 miles from Flagstaff, Arizona, and as I passed it, there was what seemed to be a person hitchhiking. The only problem was, this guy was huge, about 8 feet tall, and looked straight into the passenger window of my semi. On top of that, it seemed to be as wide as the truck from shoulder to shoulder. I passed the hitchhiker at 70 miles an hour, or so I thought. About half a mile down the road, I saw the exact same person or thing. Once again I passed it, but once again, this kept happening every 20 miles down the road to mile marker 165. I saw it every few miles. After I passed mile marker 165, I didn't see it anymore, so I thought I was done with it. But I was dead wrong. I got down to mile marker 145 and had to take a leak, so I pulled over to the side of the road to handle my business. I was about halfway done when I heard an ear-piercing scream mix between what sounded like a deer and a human. As soon as I heard it, I started looking around, and just outside the halo of my headlights, I saw it. I was never more confused and scared in my life. I tried to figure out what it was when I heard something fly through the air. Suddenly, I heard a thump, and sitting 3 feet away from me was a huge rock, roughly the size of a small basketball. It had to have weighed at least 80 pounds, and it landed a mere 3 feet away. I wasted no time trying to hop back into the truck and get away from whatever that thing was. As I passed it, it just stared me down, and I never saw it again. Can someone, please, tell me what I saw? Just a little bonus story. This one's more about revenge than anything truly horrific, but I think you'll enjoy it nonetheless. I used to work for a large state agency, and after 5 years had become a middle manager. My office was in the State Office Tower downtown, and parking was scarce, but middle management and up got reserved parking in the garage attached to our building. This was a great perk, since it's a cold state, and on days that the tower garage is full, you have to park at a private garage about a mile away and walk. One day, I had to run a few errands and pulled up to the garage a little later than usual. By the time I had gotten there, the sign on the garage said it was full, but I had a badge that let me go in anyway, and drive down into my reserved spot. There was a man at the gate who was trying to get in despite the sign saying it was full. When I realized he didn't have a badge, I backed up a little and honked my horn to let him know he could back up. This infuriates him. He gets out of his car and flips me off, and hurls some choice words my way. As he backs up out of the spot, I pull up to the gate, and he yells some more words my way about how stupid I am and that I can't read that the garage is full. I ignore him and assume he's just some guy there to have a meeting at one of the dozen or so agencies in our building and park my car. I get to my desk and get an email from the HR that one of the upper managers was sick and that I needed to cover down on some interviews. Interviews in our agency start with a group of prospective employees working on a small project together, and then the candidates sit in front of a panel individually. I walk into the room where all the candidates are sitting, and I see him there, the parking jerk. I was in my car, so he didn't get a great look at me, but I knew exactly what he looked like. The candidates introduce themselves and get to work on their small project. Parking Jerk was trying to control the entire process, but they successfully completed the project as a team. The panel then asked all the candidates to go sit in the hall while we discussed, and we would call them individually when we were ready. Once they were all out of the room, I giddily told my co-workers about my interactions with Parking Jerk, and they die laughing. We call him in first and begin asking him basic employment questions. He is otherwise a strong candidate but was very full of himself. The rest of the panel goes first, and finally it's my turn. How do you react under stress? I handle it fine. I'm a very level-headed person. Come on, everyone gets a little flustered at some point. Not me. Cool as a cucumber. So you never do anything like get out of your car and yell at a stranger? We're met with silence. Or call them names and learn how to read? That's when we all see the blood drain from his face. Do you realize this job puts you in front of the media frequently? And someone is always watching. You do realize that if you were to work here, your actions would reflect on not just you, but they would also reflect your director, the department as a whole, and state government. Do you think that if you were in my position, you would hire someone who behaved as rudely as you did? He hangs his head in shame. I think I may not be cut out for this position. That doesn't necessarily mean you're a bad person, but you may not be ready for this job. He was deflated. I really think that was the first time someone held him accountable for all his actions. He did not get the job, but a few years later I saw him working for another agency, and by all accounts, he sounded like he had learned. Sometimes in the late 2000s, my family was coming back from visiting some extended family. This was in a somewhat rural, industrial Midwest state. My dad was driving with my grandma, mum, brother and me in the car. I was in my late teens at the time. It was dusk and would soon be getting dark. We were on a back road because my grandma was navigating and didn't know what a highway was. There were some industrial buildings and stuff around, but it was all shut down or abandoned. So we're cruising along, and my grandma spots a person in one of those big electric wheelchairs that lays back. They're just sitting in an empty lot by the road. It was so out of place, and there was no one around, and it was starting to get dark. My grandma was a saint and really wanted to stop and see if they needed help, but I had a horrible feeling and felt sick thinking about it. I voiced my concerns about how something seems very wrong, and luckily my dad agreed and we didn't stop. It was a fraction of a second encounter. We didn't even slow down, but we tried to figure out what to do for a few minutes after we passed. I just had a nauseous feeling that something bad was going to happen. I don't know if it was a trap or someone who needed help that was just hanging out for some reason. To give some context, I'm a 16-year-old male and go to Ephraim, Utah every summer to do drum corps, and it usually lasts all summer. If you're not familiar with drum corps, it's just basically professional marching band. We stayed on a college campus and had 3 days every Sunday to get to know the people and just relax before we had to go rehearse the next week. This took place last summer. This particular Sunday night, my section wanted to go stargazing, since there's really nothing else to do in middle of nowhere Utah. People recommended we go to the softball field that was a little walk away from where we were staying. We all agreed to go there that night and planned on being there around 9:30 p.m. However, me and someone else from my room volunteered to go and get snacks, since we were planning on being there for a few hours. We started walking to the nearest gas station to get some chips and soda for the rest of the group. When about halfway there, we noticed a strange white truck with its lights on parked right next to the sidewalk. It was too dark to see the driver, but we thought nothing of it, even if it was a bit unusual at this hour. We got the chips and sodas and began to head to the softball field. It was quite a walk from the gas station, so we were prepared to be walking for at least 15 minutes. When we were not even halfway there, we saw the same truck again, only this time it was parked on the opposite side of the street with its lights still on. It was about then when we started to get a little suspicious. It appeared to be following us, so we began to pick up the pace. We walked for a while and turned around to look to see if it was still following us, but it was nowhere in sight. Then, we started laughing to ourselves for being so worried when it was probably nothing. But, when we were about halfway there, just as we were passing a bell tower right next to a parking lot, it was then we saw the headlights again, but this time he was driving pretty fast towards the sidewalk. Me and my friend didn't really know what to do, so we kind of just stared at it until it actually drove onto the sidewalk and nearly hit the bell tower. At this point we started sprinting, but the truck wasn't far behind. We took a shortcut to another side of the sidewalk, one we were sure the truck couldn't get to. We ran the rest of the way back to the softball field without even looking back. When we got there, we told the other people in our section, and they told the staff the next morning, but nothing was really done about it, since the only proof of the truck on the sidewalk were the tire marks. I still don't know what he wanted from us, or if I was just overreacting, but either way it still kind of spooked me. I didn't see that white truck ever again, and I hope I never have to. In 2007, I was a junior in college, and my friends and I went to spring break to Myrtle Beach. Being broke and wanting to save money on flights, we decided we would just drive there from our school in New Hampshire, and splitting the cost of gas would be cheaper. So we piled 5 of us into my friend's Hyundai hatchback and drove the 17 hours to get there. We were almost there, and we were driving through this little town called Fair Bluff, North Carolina. We get in there bright and early. First and foremost, the second we got in there, it was an absolutely morbid sight everywhere we looked. Just the year before, the town had been devastated by flooding in Hurricane Matthew. Broken down houses, all rotting from water damage, just apocalyptic. And everyone in the car agreed that the energy in this place was dreary. Despite this, we were driving slowly because we couldn't look away. So this memory plays in slow motion in my mind. Second, I'm from New York and went to college in New Hampshire, so I was oblivious to the fact that North Carolina was home to vultures. So as we're driving slowly, we see a big old animal we couldn't quite make out being eaten by vultures, and then we come across like 3 more right on the side of the road. That definitely adds to the spook factor, but everyone was still composed. We keep driving, and eventually drive by a hearse, which sound normal, but this hearse was pulled over on the side of the road, and there was nothing around for a good 2 to 3 miles. Except open fields and abandoned decaying houses, and 2 men were literally loading a casket onto it, just on the side of the road, no funeral home around for miles. So we were of course all questioning it, but ultimately just eager to get out of there at this point. The freakiness of it all came to a head when we drove by a literal cross burning. We drove by a cross that was pretty far out in the field, but it was huge, and we saw it clearly. It must have been at least 10 feet tall, wooden, and was scorched, partially burnt, still stuck in the ground, and at that point we just hightailed it. We were happy to see the welcome sign of the next town. We shook it off and proceeded to have fun at spring break. At the end on the way back, however, it started to snow, and as we were driving through Fair Bluff again, this time it was pitch black, without a single light except for our headlights. The car was hydroplaning like crazy, and we were dangerously low on gas. We got out of there all right, but I felt genuine fear, both the first and even more the second time we went through. You'll never catch me rolling through there again. I was in the mall, Crossgates. It was a pretty large place, and I was 13 at the time, being 30 now, so it was a while ago. My mum was cashing out in Lord & Taylor, and me being such a cool person wanted to hang in the car. My mum, after some coaxing, begrudgingly gave me the key to sit in the car and listen to music. There were only a couple of people ahead of her in line. It was early evening, and the sunlight was still creeping between the clouds, and the sky was warm. It was summer. I walked to the car, but I felt off. I could hear a car behind me, but it was a parking lot, so that was useful. When I see this big truck, they pulled up in front of me. The back was open, which I thought was odd. It was a huge U-Haul, and it was empty. A man was in the back of the U-Haul. He asked me to show them, the 3 men, where the Hooters was. Now, anyone familiar with this mall at the time knows perfectly well you can see Hooters from the lot I'm sitting at. Their bright orange sign says it all. I pointed in the direction, mentioning it that you could see it from here. He asked me to get in the truck, the big, empty hole in the back, so that I could show them where it was. I was kind of stuck. You see, there were 3 of them. Why the hell would I get in the back of a box truck? You couldn't even see the driver. I was speechless. All my fears rushed back to me from my childhood. Out of nowhere, I could hear keys being jingled from behind me. Some man, an older man, probably in his 50s, came running up to me, pretended he was my father, and told them to get off and that I was his daughter. They drove away pretty quickly, not really listening to what he said. I still wonder what would have happened if he hadn't have helped me out. I recently moved out in the middle of nowhere. I was about 5 minutes away from home when I stopped at a stop sign to look for a lighter in my purse. I noticed a man walking towards my car from the tree line and immediately drove off. It was pretty late at night, and my closest neighbour is about 10 minutes out from where I am. It's all woodland and farms. There's no good reason the man should have been out in the middle of nowhere like that. I picked up my neighbour, who lives a few miles away, who had a couple of young daughters himself, and we went out to look for the man after reporting it to the police. We never found him, but there were footprints all around the tree line. I never got out of the car, but my neighbour, who was properly armed and protected, spent a good 30 minutes searching the area. A few months rolled around, and they found the guy living on private property, along with another man. They had been kidnapping young women for months, and eating them alive / selling them on the black market. They used an abandoned shed as a slaughterhouse and had meat hooks hung everywhere. They found a missing woman naked and locked in a cage, when authorities believed dozens of the missing women cases ended up there. It freaked me out for a while and still does. Being a woman, I'm usually extra careful anyway, but I definitely felt like this was a wake-up call to be extra precautious. I remember getting the Amber Alerts at least once every other week, all with the same description. Long brown hair, around 5'3", blue eyes. I have long brown hair, and 5'2" and have blue eyes. Really creepy. After this happened, I made a point to become very familiar with firearms. I'm originally from Chicago, so that's saying something. Crime in the city is predictable. Crime in the South is straight up out of a horror movie. I'll start at the beginning of the worst day and a half of my life. Right now I'm a female at 31. At the time this happened, I had just turned 22. I got off work early from my second job. The cool breeze kissing my face, cooling me down as I drove up the long driveway. It was so calming. My husband and I at the time lived on this ranch that we also worked on. It was dark, desolate, and just had a completely different feel at night. The creatures of the night howling and chirping, the shadows of all the trees dancing in the headlights. Then there's our house, smack dab in the middle of it. The forest unraveling around it as far as you can see. I made it to my front porch, and something just felt off. I can't explain it, but I soon found out when I walked in there. They were there, on the couch, completely naked. The next hour was a complete blur of shouting, crying, and him begging me to listen. I just couldn't, not again. This was the end of us. I packed up everything I could in my small black Honda, spiraling gravel into the house, and sped back down the same driveway I had just not too long before been so serenely driving home on. It was about a 4-hour drive back to my dad's house, my safe space. I wanted my dad, reverting back to my 10-year-old self, longing for my dad to fix my proverbial boo-boos. I drove on, determined, into the night, and everything was going smoothly, until I was almost back to my hometown. You see, my gas gauge hadn't worked in a long time, and through the horrible situation I just endured doing laps in my head, and had forgotten to fill up before I left. The car started to sputter, and cut out in the absolute worst of places possible. I was on a 3-lane highway at 3 in the morning, and the only place to pull my car over was a tiny bike lane butted up to a retaining wall. I was screwed. There was no one on the highway at this time, and if there were, they weren't going to stop for me. I put my hazards on, but that was just a band-aid for the moment. A couple of semis had passed me in the 10 minutes or so that I had become stranded. They barely saw me in time to move over. They passed so close that my entire car shook. It shook so hard that the crack in my front windshield started to spread haphazardly across it. I was scared at this point, and I didn't know what to do. Suddenly, I saw a car on the opposite side of the highway slow down and make an illegal U-turn across 3 desolate lanes. The small SUV pulls up next to my window. In the car were 2 young males in their teens, and what looked to be like their young girl companions. The guy driving asked me what happened. I gave them a brief rendition of the story, and he then offered to drive me to the nearest petrol station. I was hesitant at first, but quickly realizing my current situation, I reluctantly obliged. We made it to the parking lot of a Wally World, which I thought was odd. I dare not question it yet. I held onto my purse closely, trying not to draw attention to the nervous sweat beading down my brow. The driver then tells me his friends have somewhere to be, and they all but the driver just exit the car without rhyme or reason, leaving me alone with the young male driver. He tells me that he'll quickly take me to the gas station, and now a small sense of relief comes over me. Then quickly fades, because I knew this town, I had grown up here, and he was not heading towards any gas station. The young man, which I did not get a name of, suddenly turns down a dark, dimly lit alleyway and just parks the car and says, nonchalantly, "Hey, I just need to park here for a minute and take my insulin," insinuating he's diabetic. It wasn't insulin. It looked dirty. It was drug paraphernalia. I've seen enough cops to know what they look like. At that moment, my heart sank to my buttocks. I said to him, can you just take me back to my car, please? I'll figure it out." He didn't respond. Just then I caught a glimpse of two skinny men clumsily trying to duck behind a dumpster behind us in the alley. I was naive enough to bring this up to my unwanted capture. He said in a menacing tone, "I don't know what you're talking about. You're tripping, girl." I instantly went into fight or flight mode. I started telling him my tragic life story, like how my brother had killed himself, and I was all my dad had left. He even tried to shush me. I kept talking, told him about my cheating husband, and the fact that I just wanted to get home and be with my dad. For a moment he paused and looked at me, and then something clicked in his brain. Before I knew it, he was speeding off to the poorly lit alleyway into the scorching lights of the highway and the Walmart across the street. He screeched to a stop in front of my car, threw out my purse and a random half-full gas can from behind his seat, and uttered the words, which I will never forget, that are seared into my brain. "Don't ever get into someone's car you don't know. Now get the hell out of here." And he sped off down the highway, vanishing forever. There are so many things I wish I did differently, but thinking back, I'm alive, and it could have been much worse. I, for one, will never be the same because of it. I service firefighting breathing air compressors and was on a service call in the northwest of Pennsylvania. I was running a bit late, so it was dark when I left the fire station, as this was in February about 15 years ago. As I drove down this twisty rural two-lane, I passed a Dodge Durango on the side of the road with its headlights on. It wasn't near any houses, just in a wide spot, so I thought maybe they'd broken down or gotten a flat. I slowed down and went behind the Durango to see a shape lying on the ground. I thought it might be a driver trying to get the spare wheel out from under the vehicle, but then I realized it was a man on top of a woman holding her down and apparently trying to strangle her. I had to drive about a quarter of a mile further before I found a spot to turn around. I was in a 16-foot box van, so I couldn't just do a U-turn in the road. I turned around and headed back. The Durango passed me, heading the way I had been going originally. I got to where it had been parked, and the woman was lying there in the snow. I thought she might be dead, but as I pulled up, she sat up, then shakily got to her feet. She was probably in her 40s, very thin and in a skirt and an inadequate jacket. I asked if she was okay, and she just said, "I'm cold." I had to get her into the passenger seat of my truck and cranked up the heat. She sat there shivering, her body hunched forward. She had blood on her face and her fingers were red. She didn't say anything about what had happened. I pulled out my phone and surprisingly had enough signal to call 911. I explained what I'd seen and they dispatched a state trooper. It took 15 minutes for him to get there. The only thing the woman said was, "They're gonna arrest me." I offered her some napkins and water, and she wiped her face off. I didn't want to bother her, since she seemed to be in shock, so we just sat there in silence for a while. The trooper arrived, and she let out a designated sigh, opened the door and said, "Thank you for helping me," and walked over to the trooper. He spoke to her for a few seconds, then had her sit in his car. He came over and I explained what I had seen, and described the Durango. He thanked me and said I could go. A few days later my phone rang while I was away from it. It was a restricted number, and the voicemail was from the trooper, thanking me again, saying that he may need me to offer some more testimony if I was willing. I never heard back from the police. I never found out what had happened. I think it was either a sex worker or a drug deal that went bad, but I never saw anything about it. When I was 20, I used to go driving around a lot at night. One time I was doing my usual drive around to no particular destination, when I decided to go down this dirt road in the middle of nowhere in South Georgia. There was a cotton field on the right side and woods along the left side. It was like this for miles. Shortly after driving along the road for about a mile or two, I noticed something hanging from a branch along the wood line. This branch stretched all the way across the road, nearly reaching the cotton field. What was hanging from this branch is stuck in my mind, even years later. It was a deer, but not just any deer. This deer had been mutilated. It was hanging from its antlers by what looked like towing straps. It also looked as though it had been beaten with blunt objects. Its body was filled with deep lacerations, and it was also nearly split in half horizontally. Its lower half was barely hanging by a thread. Still to this day, I have no idea what it was doing there like that. This happened about a year or two ago. I'm in the Alabama Air Force National Guard, but I work in a city in Florida. I'm traveling home for the weekend late on Friday night, since I had to be at my unit the next morning. I have drill once a month. I have been traveling for a while, and I am on a highway in Alabama near my parents' house. It's about 9 p.m., and there are no lights to light up the street. It's pitch dark, when I see a car stop at a stop sign about 60 to 70 yards in front of me, and he goes across the street I'm driving on. Mind you, it's dark and the car had his headlights on. When I go to the street he crosses, and I look down the street he went down, and there was no street, no cars, no lights, nothing. There was only grass and a telephone pole. I would have seen the red backlights at least, as I was going too fast for him to disappear before I got to him. I got out of there as fast as I could, and to this day I still cannot explain exactly what happened. I went on a cross-country RV trip this past spring with my friend Melissa and her 7 kids and 2 young German shepherds starting in West Virginia, in a 20-year-old RV christened Big Betsy, and almost everything that could go wrong did. Among other things, the water lines broke the night before we had to go, so we relied on jugs for the entirety of the trip. The gas tank cap was busted, so it was a hell of a job to get it off. Tires had good tread, but a couple were pretty old, so they worried me. We found out the auxiliary batteries sucked, so we needed to jump-start them with a power supply every time we stopped. The main battery cable had a bad connection, so every time we started the engine, I had to stand in front and jiggle the cables while she turned the key. The slide jammed, and we had to get a pry bar to get in and out of it. Driving through Colorado Springs, we blew a spark plug out and had to stop for repairs. Luckily, her brother, who used to be a diesel mechanic, was traveling with us, and only took a day to fix it. Regardless, we were still having a great time, seeing the scenery, stopping at landmarks and national parks like Garden of the Gods, Mesa Verde, and the Grand Canyon. The furnace went out the night before we got to the Grand Canyon, and it got down to 17 degrees. I got up every hour for 10 minutes to heat the RV a bit using the propane stove, turned it on and off to rest, then did it again every hour that night. We went to Roswell, Las Vegas, then on to Malibu to see the ocean, and LA for a few days. Then we headed up to Yellowstone and were blown away not only by the park itself, but the drive there from California, through Utah and Idaho, just so breathtakingly beautiful. If you've listened this far, you've come to the point of the story. After Yellowstone, we had to leave from the west entrance, since the other roads east and south hadn't opened yet. We drove up into Montana, and for some reason her brother insisted on getting off at I-90 to a 2-lane highway through the Crow and Northern Cheyenne reservations. He was perpetually driving like an hour ahead of us because his RV was faster, and he's a bit of a reckless dude. But we didn't want to be far from him in case we ran into engine trouble, so we didn't really have a choice but to follow him. Even though I voiced much hesitation on taking a back road route in the dead of night through a reservation. So we find ourselves taking the ramp to Route 212 and had just gotten onto the Crow Reservation and stopped to gas up, and immediately things just feel odd. It's past 10 p.m. and as I'm pumping gas, I'm hearing children running around and playing off in the dark, and cars keep driving up to us slowly, checking us out. I get back in and Melissa is already saying, "Get us out of here, it's creepy as hell." So I do. We haul off down 212 in pursuit of her idiotic brother. Alright, he did save our bacon in Colorado Springs, so maybe idiotic is too strong. And there is nothing out there. Inky black skies, long, desolate roads, sporadic groups of 4 or 5 houses every few miles. I'm acutely aware that we lost self-service as soon as we got on that highway, so I'm just praying that nothing goes wrong. I try to ignore the acute feeling that something is watching us. Her dogs start to whine in their cages. The feeling of unease has continued and I really don't want to stop, but Melissa said we need to let them out to poop or we'd be cleaning up a mess. I pull over next to a big field and she gets her oldest daughter Ariana and Isabella to leash them, and I throw open the doors to let them out. As soon as they hit the grass, the 2 German shepherds sight something in the darkness and start going absolutely mental. They're barking and straining against the leash, and the girls are struggling to control them. My blood pressure spikes, and I look over at Melissa, and she looks completely bewildered. And I reach up to the overhead compartment and pocket my handgun, which I brought for protection. We get the girls and the dogs back in the RV, and peel off down the highway again, cognizant of the fact that we're probably going to have to clean up crap, since they couldn't go outside. They're back in their cages and continue to whine. I drive on for another half hour or so and they're still whining, and Melissa says we really need to let them go outside again. This is the last thing I want to do, because this whole time I've had this feeling that something is watching us, and I'm just running through my head all the scary stories I've read about evil spirits, wendigos, skinwalkers and all that stuff, and I reason with myself that I'm just scaring myself and they probably just smelled foxes or coyotes or something. And I really didn't want to have to clean up dog poo from the inside of the cages on some forgotten highway using jugs of water in the dark. We pull over again, and this time I take my gun with me, and I walk outside with the girls as they take the dogs out. I distinctly remember thinking, I don't know what good a gun will do against evil spirits, but I'm not going down without a fight. The moment their paws hit the ground, they immediately start to howl and bark into the darkness. The hair on the back of my neck stands up, and I'm looking at Ariana, and she has this look of terror on her face. I say to the girls, "Get the dogs back in the RV. We're getting the hell out of here." But her dog Hazel is straining so hard at the leash, and she can't get her inside. So I pick up this German shepherd in both arms and have to heave her through the door and run inside. As I lean out to pull the door closed, I think to myself, this is the moment where something with sharp claws grabs my arm and pulls me into the dark. Thankfully, as I'm here writing this today from my bedroom and not the belly of a skinwalker, this did not happen. The dogs go back to their cages and continue whining. I jump back in the driver's seat and gun it down the road, and Melissa leans over and says in a panicked whisper, "What's going on out here? Don't you feel it? Am I crazy or does something feel really wrong?" I glance at her and remember one of the big no-nos of Skidmore law. You don't talk about them. You don't even think of them if you can help it, because it draws their attention to you. I say, no, you're not crazy, but I can't talk about it right now. I feel it too, but just trust me, we cannot talk about it now. As I'm cresting a small hill on the highway, I look over at her and say, just trust me, we'll talk about it later, okay? But we can't now. I look back ahead, and that's when I see it. This enormous white rabbit standing on its back legs in the middle of the road. Looking back now, with the benefit of a cool head, I'm sure it was just a bit bigger than normal, but I'm telling you at that moment it looked huge. It looked like it was 3'5". I swerve this 37-foot long RV around this beast of a hare, but thankfully keep control. I pull the pedal to the metal and say, I'm sorry, if I don't care if the dogs have poo in their cages. I'm not stopping again. And I didn't, thankfully. And they didn't either. We made it to the town of Spearfish safely and stopped for the night. And after visiting Mount Rushmore the next day, we recounted the fear we all felt that night. And I told Melissa specifically why I don't want to talk about it. And she said, yeah, I knew why. I've read all kind of stuff about the Native American legends. And I realized later with a chuckle that maybe those spirits were real. Maybe they weren't. But if they were, they probably didn't appreciate me wearing my Cleveland Indians cap throughout their reservation. I'm a motorcyclist and was driving my way down from my girlfriend's house. It's about a 20-minute ride, but it was 3 a.m. and the road goes through a forest without any streetlights. So I ride through the forest, already giving everything to my little 50cc dirt bike, when a naked mannequin is suddenly visible on the side of the road. I saw it appear in my headlights and drove by it doing 60 kilometers an hour. It was scary as hell. A mannequin standing there naked on the side of a dark road in a forest at 3 a.m. in the morning. Damn. I'm sure if any one of you would have passed it in the same situation, you'd have all got shivers too. When I was 19, I was driving around town with a friend sometime after midnight, talking crap and listening to music. We drive past this road with a signpost to an area neither of us have heard of, despite both living in this town our whole lives. I asked if she wanted to go see where the road went, and she said yes. So I pull a U-turn and off we go. It's a paved road, with heavy trees on each side and a few houses. Nothing unusual for either of us. I was living on a street like this at the time anyway. Within about 5 minutes, the conversation just kind of dies off. And a few minutes after that, I start to get this uneasy feeling. Then we passed a kangaroo on the side of a road. It remained perfectly still, just turning its head to watch us drive past, and I got this distinct impression it was standing guard. After that, I just got more and more anxious. I ended up turning to my friend and saying, "This is gonna sound stupid, but can you—" She was already taking her seatbelt off. "I'll lock the back doors." We kept following the road even after that, because we were stubborn and didn't know when to admit defeat. It was at least half an hour. Besides, my 60-minute cassette tape had flipped twice over, 30 minutes of music on each side, between pulling on the paved roads and coming to a sign saying dirt road ahead. By this stage I felt physically sick and my skin was crawling. Without a word, I did the quickest three-point turn I was able to and head back down the road. The closer we got to the turnoff, the better I felt, until we were back on the main road, where I felt like I could breathe easily again. We told a few people about it and got brushed off by most. We didn't even drive past that turnoff without flinching or shuddering for a few months. The feeling of dread had been that strong. Then about 6 months later, she turns to me out of nowhere and says, "Let's drive it during the day." So we went. My friend has both her phone and mine on her lap, with the emergency numbers punched in, and we're playing upbeat pop music trying to keep us calm. It took us less than 5 minutes to reach the dirt road, and on checking the odometer, the paved section was only 1 kilometer long. Once again, we got the hell out of there, and have never been back. No idea what the hell was going on that night, but I can say with certainty that we were not meant to be there. Even 20 years later, if someone mentions the area of the signpost, we shudder. And recently, I turned to her out of nowhere and said, "Hey, was that you with me on the road where—" "Yes, and I don't want to talk about it," she'll reply. This happened in Sydney, about 2013. I was driving through a factory area early in the morning to get to the airport. It was still dark, and there were no other cars on the road, when we see a huge, tall figure just start to casually walk across the 4 lanes. As we drove closer, our lights shined on him, and he slowed down even more and just glared at us and kept walking forward. My boyfriend yelled out loud as he rolled to an almost complete stop. And as my eyes focused on the man crossing the road, I noticed the swastika tattoo on his shoulder, among others. The combat boots, the camo pants, and his hands were balled into fists. It was bloody terrifying, and the way he confidently slowed down and turned to stare at us as we drove towards him. I honestly felt like we could have hit him with our car and we would have bounced off him. It took a good 5 minutes before we spoke about it. It was just so unsettling, and the first time it ever dawned on me that people like that lived in my city. I still feel extreme shock about this whole thing when I realized he was for real, and his confidence was terrifying. I got the feeling he could be a person that would cause extreme violence with no cause and continue on as if it had never even happened. I didn't think those people really existed near where I lived, outside of documentaries. Last December, I went to a kayaking trip that was a 5-hour drive away from my place. I was invited by my friend to accompany his wife, so I left quite late, but I predicted I would get there around 8 p.m. The campsite itself wasn't that secluded. It was by the river, behind a little town, but to get there, I had to use a 2-lane expressway that goes through a forest reserve. It was around 7 p.m. when I reached the expressway, but what I did not expect was how winding and dark the road was. A few solar road lights and some signs of beware the animals passing here and there. I was driving alone and it was drizzling, but I wasn't too worried because the expressway was filled with cars going in the same direction as me. Because of that, the traffic was slower than the average speed. I have to admit I'm not a patient driver by any chances, so any chances I have to pass the cars in front of me until I get to this van at the end of the line. But I decide maybe I should just stay behind the van to be safe since the road was getting dark. Then we reached the passing line. The cars behind me started to pass us. The van maintained in slow speed. I counted and there were already 6 cars past us, so I ramped up and left the van. There was a right bend, and once I got through it, I was alone on the road. I waited for the cars behind me to come out from right behind the bend, but there was no one. I thought I was driving too fast, so I slowed down. Not even the van showed up. The passing lane ended, and now I was driving through a ravine. I saw a temporary signboard saying drive slow, and a few meters ahead another signboard saying landslide 100 meters ahead. What the hell? Is this road closed? But I didn't see any alternate route on the way, and there was no junction, so I drove as slow as it could be, and there was no landslide whatsoever, and still no sign of any vehicle on the road except mine. It was the most agonizing 10 minutes of my life, driving alone on a narrow, winding road in the middle of nowhere, just hills and trees all around me. No light, but my car lamp in front of me, and my phone screen. It was eerily silent. I put the volume of my car radio up, but I just didn't feel right. and it was so cold, with the air conditioning turned off too. I saw a welcome signboard at a left junction, turned left, and have never felt so relieved seeing random shop lots with people in them. I'm a truck driver. I was crossing Texas in the middle of the night. After a while I become white line mesmerized when I notice a few red lights slowly flashing ahead. Huh? Construction zone, I guess. Except, as I'm coming out of my self-imposed hypnosis, I slowly become aware that more and more red lights are there, on both sides of the highway, and they're all blinking at the same time. Fully awake now, I find myself trying to find the ends of the light, to the left or the right. I feel like Hammy and Over the Hedge. It never ends. It never ends that way too. I'm really beginning to freak out, but oh, wait. It was just a wind farm, and I'm an idiot. This happened to a friend of mine and her brother, who I also know. The car had 2 other people in the back seat, so it wasn't some sort of illusion or mind trick. They were driving down to Tennessee from Kansas. It was a very dark and lonely road, as told by my friend called Kate. They were doing between 60 and 65. 2 hours pass and there are no signs of life. It was 2 a.m. and suddenly they see a black dog running towards them with blood eyes, and they slam on the gas and go faster as they near the dog, when it just vanishes. 5 miles down the road they saw the dog again with red eyes, and they slam on the brakes and turn the other way. Till this day they don't know what it was. The scary part was everyone saw it too. Kate, her brother, Jim, and the 2 friends in the back seat. They all saw the dog. They've speculated it could have been a bloodhound, but they don't know. I was going home from my girlfriend's apartment fairly late, between 12 and 1 a.m., when I noticed a man walking slowly on the driver's side. Given this is an old road with only 2 lanes, oncoming and going traffic, it freaked me out. I called my dad and he mentioned, usually when immigrants are tired and needing help, they show themselves and walk next to the highway. I called 911, and I hope they got the help they needed. When I was driving this one time, I saw what I thought was the goat man of Nerdy Mountain. I was driving home from work late one night at 11 p.m. The car overheats, so I have to pull into a lay-by in the middle of an empty mountain road to let it cool down for a bit. Slowly, I drive in, when I see a white, translucent humanoid figure run in front of my headlights and disappear into the forest. I sat in my car for a half hour, crapping myself while I waited for it to cool down. It was the most bizarre experience of my life. This happened to my wife's friend. One day, she was driving home from work, in a quiet area, when an unmarked police car sped up behind her and began flashing his blues and signaling for her to pull over. To this day, she doesn't know why, but something wasn't right, and after a call to her boyfriend, he gave her a contact for our local police station. She rang the number and asked about an unmarked police car wanting to pull her over. The person on the phone did a quick check, or possibly contacted a dispatcher, and they were told to keep driving but stay calm. Within 4 minutes, 4 marked cars came speeding up behind, and before she knew what was happening, boxed the unmarked car in and forced it to stop. The dispatcher told her to drive around the corner and to stop, and as it turned out, the guy was being hunted by the police for pretending to be an officer to get young women to pull over when he has them at gunpoint to do all sorts of insidious things to them.